Great. Well, thanks for being here, everybody, and being part of our 7th long-range facility planning meeting. Last time we kicked off the process again, and I thought it was a very good, robust discussion that we had. And one thing we'd like to share with you is kind of some of our thoughts and sort of a slight tweak to the process moving forward, and kind of some thoughts that are related to that, particularly as it relates to the feedback that we got last time. Looking to today and tonight, the agenda, you all may have seen it sent out earlier. We really wanted to, one thing that we didn't do last time when we restarted the committee was we didn't really look at our norms again as a committee. We'd done that kind of at prior committee meetings. So thought it would be a good opportunity to revisit some of that and kind of get some thoughts on that. We also, as I mentioned earlier, wanted to look at the process overview. I think one of the items that we had heard last time was, we're kind of, maybe being a little too quick on trying to find solutions and not laying enough foundation and groundwork in preparation for that. So we want to kind of look at what that might look like. We also have the remaining balance of our educational adequacy progress reports that we want to share with you and get some observations and feedback, very similar to what we did last time. And then also, I know that you had a report back, I believe it was your 2nd long-range facility planning meeting with Tom and team on the building condition assessment overview. We wanted to kind of revisit that a little bit and just give a real quick overview of that and just some comparative analyses that we saw from there. And then we wanted to end a little bit earlier than we had in the past, just so we can really kind of have more opportunity for dialogue at the end of today's meeting, rather than trying to cut it short. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Scott and let him say a few words.
Well, welcome everyone. It's nice to be here, and it's nice to start this journey with you guys as a committee. I've reached out to quite a few of you to meet with you individually, and I'll continue to do that. And if I haven't reached out to you at this point, it's just a heads up that I'd like to do that as we start the new year, just to learn a little bit more about the context behind this whole process and sort of past history, things that have been going on. So, and like Jonah said, I think, given the feedback that the committee gave to our consultants, to Jonah and Richard after the last meeting, we've kind of taken the steps to make this a little bit more systematic for everyone in terms of the process. I think you'll find it to be that there's more clarity around that as well as we move forward. And again, if there's anything I can ever do for you, not just as committee members, but as people, members of our community, just please reach out, and I'll put my cell phone in the chat. So just wanted to say welcome to everybody. And if I don't see you before the break, happy holidays as well. Thanks, Jonah.
Great, thank you, Scott. So mentioned earlier the norms for the long-range facility planning committee work. Again, this is a rehash of kind of what we've talked about before, but we really want to just revisit this at the beginning of each meeting and talk about, making sure that we're all actively engaged and that we're, respecting. There's going to be a variety of opinions and ideas, and all really good ideas and opinions and concepts and questions. We want to be respectful of all of that and talk about that as a group. There are no bad ideas. Meetings will start on time. And then, again, and I don't think I have to tell anybody this because everybody has been very great about getting out in the community, but you are ambassadors for the project in this long-range facility planning process. So we want you to be well informed through this, and be able to do that with confidence, and to also be open-minded, think outside of the box for opportunities. We saw a lot of really great discussion last time, so there's certainly no lack of that, which is really great. Consensus decision making. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide and what that means. But be a good listener. And of course, it goes without saying, keep the needs of the students first. And, this is an advisory group, and, we have a very, very important role as an advisory group. Final decisions will be made by the school board. But that being said, we're laying the foundation by doing the work that we're doing. And we want to be able to give really good foundational feedback to the board. And then, of course, obviously, have fun. So it's really great seeing everybody here. That's awesome. It just shows that everybody really cares and likes being part of this process. Consensus, consensus is always something that is a bit of a challenge in these kind of larger groups. As I mentioned earlier, we all have different perspectives and thoughts and feedback. And we really want to coalesce around a vision together and work together as a board committee, and really kind of bring all of that to the fore during these meetings together, so we all understand all that foundational work that's been done to date, why those decisions were made, and how they were made, so that people can really get a sense for that. One thing that we're suggesting moving forward is what we like to call a parking lot of ideas. And so we really think it's important for us to get through the agenda and kind of through the work that we've planned for these meetings. But we're gonna try to cut it shorter so that we can have more opportunity for discussion in the end of the agenda. And so as we come up with ideas and opportunities, we'll keep track of those ideas, kind of that parking lot. And I'd ask Angela and our Miro board to just place those here, and rather than go into a great discussion at that time, let's do it at the end of the meeting and really kind of formalize that and start talking about that and getting more, having a more robust discussion on that. Because, like I said, you guys just have a lot of really, really great ideas. And I think the one of the really important pieces of that, though, is maybe when we discuss that and go through that parking lot of ideas, we vote on that. If there's something that's actionable that comes out of that parking lot or throughout this process that, perhaps we're either at an impasse or have some deadlock on, maybe we vote on it. And if we get a 75% kind of like, hey, that's a really great idea, we should do that, then let's do that. And we will adjust and we'll change our process moving forward. This is a very fluid thing. So does that make some sense, everybody? Some of that foundational work, as you all know, is work that had been done before we came on board. Again, I believe it was the second long-range facility planning meeting when the guiding principles for this work were really formalized and recorded. Those guiding principles are protect our community's investments in all Silver Falls School District schools, provide a safe and high quality learning environment for all students in all buildings, and then of course spend our tax dollars as wisely as possible. With that, we'd like to kind of spend some time here to really go through our suggested edits to the planning process as we move forward. If you remember, when we met last time, we'd kind of updated this because of circumstances, outside of all of our control, and extended the schedule a little bit. But we were still looking to wrap up end of February to have a plan to suggest to the school board by end of February, beginning of March. It's become clear that that's far too soon at the moment. So what we're suggesting is an additional 3 meetings on top of that. And so I think with that, I'll kick it over to Richard and kind of let him really talk about what we're proposing for the January meeting and then the meetings thereafter.
And thank you, Jonah. So what we're trying to do is build a foundation so that when you do start having discussions about pros and cons and ideas and options, that we do have a clear understanding and even a process of maybe digesting and figuring out what this information means. So we're going to start that tonight. In January, I beg your pardon, we're going to start that tonight with educational advocacy update, and then we're going to give you a synopsis of the assessment that was done a couple of years ago. Kind of show you in bar charts really kind of where all the needs might lie from a physical environment. So next time we meet, we want to talk about population enrollment. Those typically correlate to school planning because there's if the enrollment grows, you need more space. So there have been some studies done. There was discussion about the quality of those studies. So we're going to bring those back and kind of assess those and kind of reach some conclusions for further consideration. The second part of next meeting is going to be project budgeting. It's real boring stuff, but it's important because when somebody says, well, I can build a house for $300,000, they probably can, but that's just the beginning. You all have surveys, there's design fees, there's city improvements, there's all these other elements. And for a school district, it's no different. You do have the cost of the building, but what are all those development costs that go into creating an entire budget for the project? And so we're going to give you some very simple tools as to how that looks and what goes into it so that it's part of your good bond planning. We're not talking about how can a $300,000 house be really a $450,000 house with all the development charges that go into it. So we're going to explain that to you. We're also going to kind of revisit the historic buildings, which ones are considered historic and how do they relate to the State Historic Preservation Office, also known as SHPO. There is a requirement in the Long Range Facility Plan grant funding mechanism that needs to be addressed. Any structure over 50 years old is potentially historic. So that's what we're going to do next meeting. You can see it's foundational stuff. We should understand enrollment and population growth. Then we should understand how budgets are put together. And then we can determine what buildings are really historic and how that gets addressed with SHPO. So that's the intended agenda for January. At this point, are there any simple questions on that? Hi, Steve. Okay. So the next meeting, we're going to revisit. Yes, Ray. Sorry.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. Just a comment for the future and your planning. For me, when it gets down to decision times or recommendations, whatever you want to call it, there's a lot of data that is involved in that. And I certainly would appreciate as much data as possible in some kind of a PDF format before we actually, get to that point.
Glad you said that because that's exactly, that's my bad, sorry. My son calling me. Okay, sorry about that. Ray, to your point, we're going to give you all the data you want. We are going to give the group as a whole snapshots, but the data will be created in detail. But we're going to start with the big and narrow it down and then really kind of focus exactly on the implications of those decisions. So the history and heritage in February is really to kind of revisit what we've heard and understood about the community, starting with the community survey analysis completed in 2019. And what did that tell you about your K-8 communities, about your K-5 neighborhoods? You just switched to K-5 model on Mark Twain and Robert Frost. How does that look? What does it mean to these communities they serve? Then we're going to talk about the middle school itself. What makes Silverton Middle School a success? And what can we do to support it? So we're kind of taking this analysis and matching it exactly with your school. Same thing with the high school. So we're just going to talk about the history and the heritage and what these schools mean to the communities they serve. So that's February. All right. By that time, we hope we have given you enough foundational information that you can start talking about some big ideas. And we're putting out text that just describes the process. These are some of the elements that we've seen in the past that influence what communities decided to do relative to their planning process. What about the K-8 communities? What about the K-5s? Where is enrollment growing? Where is it stable? What impacts teaching and learning? So you can see those are some of the elements that we're going to bring up, but it's going to be an interaction. We want these big ideas from you. Then we're going to start to put into some scenario planning. And you can see these are some catchphrases of past work. Everybody knows the chicken in every pot. These are just stock examples. We have always found an opportunity to create something out of what you tell us as a community. You can phase it overall. You can serve the most students. You can just go in and do warm, safe, and dry, which is just to make the buildings sufficient for now. So that's where the first time we will really start talking about some big ideas, and then we'll reflect on it. What did we learn? So between this meeting and the next one, we help you by creating some options for your consideration. Again, it's kind of a kickoff of some ideas that might work relative to what we heard. Then we'll go through finding a process to determine what are the common ideas, what are unique ideas. Then you look at alternatives. Is it renovation? Is it new construction? And then if we need to, we've used multi-level voting so that we can take 30 ideas and narrow them down to the top 10 or 12 that we can focus on. And it's a good way to sort out some. We merge some ideas, but what we're trying to do is give you some tools or help you get to closer idea, that 2 or 3 ideas that really have some broad support. And then we reflect on what did we learn. So you can see we've talked about ideas 2 times. The third meeting, I've even lost track of what month we're in, maybe April.
I think we're in May.
Okay, in May. Thank you, Jonah. So again, we're going to review these outcomes and the trends and what needs to be changed. And we actually do a draft. And what did we learn from this new draft? At that point, we actually going to take this draft report and tweak it based on that meeting and bring it back to you one more time in June. Next slide. Oh, sorry. So anyway, what we're trying to do is from our experience, based on what we heard, we're going to try to take you through a logical process that builds on the foundation and gives you enough time that you can talk about options and know the background and really create a strategic long-range facility plan. So this is just an outline. It's a framework. We don't have any set destination because you're going to create it.
Yeah. And I think before we move on, I think we should maybe pause for a minute, and based on all that information that we just kind of really quickly summarized, is there something we're missing, as it relates to being able to come, as you say, Ray, to be able to really come to some conclusions and put ideas to paper? Is there something else that we should be considering as part of that information gathering phase from your perspectives? And does that all make sense from your perspective on laying that foundation? Kind of some thoughts some thoughts there.
Yes, there's enrollment predictions. Yes, that was on in January. We're going to talk about enrollment, population growth, and enrollment trends. And we can do it we're going to do it by a couple different methods. So what I would advocate is the great response to your question is we're going to bring all that to. We're going to talk just about that. It's not going to be mixed in with other discussions about condition of buildings or which ones we should do. Let's kind of reach an agreement on what is it really saying, because if we can't reach some sort of consensus on what enrollment looks like or population growth, then we're still going to be trying to figure out, we're trying to answer too many questions to which we don't have enough answers. That was a great question.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. So that's the plan moving forward, and kind of how we want to create that foundation of knowledge and come to some resolution on some of these concepts with some just good data and some good knowledge there. So part of that good knowledge and that foundation, of course, is those educational adequacies. And if you recall last time, we still had 4 of those to do and 1 to report on. And that we met with Scott and Steve and the principals and got those meetings set up and got a lot of really great information at those meetings. Coincidentally, 3 of the schools that we had talked at length about last time were 3 of the schools that we needed to talk to still. So that was really kind of enlightening for us as we moved forward, and in asking some of the questions related to those schools. So one of those is, of course, Prattam School, and there was a question here in the chat. So we will be pushing out a bond, correct? Was the question.
So, Joe, I responded. Yeah,
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah, we believe this is a decision of the board. Excuse me, I'm sorry. We believe this is the foundation for creating a good plan. The timing will be up to the board. The timing of May and November elections really takes more strategic planning and actually bond planning. So ultimately, to do any of this work, you're going to have to, or any of your work you might envision, will require a capital improvement bond. So the long answer is yes. The short part of it is the timing is yet to be determined. Does that do well? Is that okay? Thank you.
I think that works well, Richard. So very similar to what we talked about last time, we'll just kind of go through all of these items. Remember, there's those 8 categories per school that we really looked at. At the end of this, we'll see the matrix with all of the schools combined, so we can kind of see the educational adequacy at each school. We'll very similar to what we did last time. After we're done with each school, we'll pause, and then we'll get feedback and observations from each individual site, and then we'll move on to the next. At the end, once we see that educational matrix all together, I'd like to get some observations and feedback and thoughts, because there's certainly some patterns that you see there based on that scoring, but I'd like to hear from you guys. Starting with core curriculum, at Prattam, there's no dedicated space for instructional assistants, but there's enough space from their perspective in classrooms for the number of students, but the space needs for 6-8 for the middle school are currently being housed in the commons. So that would lead you to believe that they really do need a classroom in addition to what they have. SPED happens in the gym or in the basement, and kids eat upstairs. I guess a big part of that was because of the noise, but also because of the quality of space in the basement. The main office doesn't have enough space currently, and this is a similar thing we'll hear at all these schools. There's no itinerant space available. no dedicated library space, but each classroom has their own books, and they seem to really like that, that setup. Staff doesn't have their own bathroom, they share with students. And then for the specialty programs, art happens in every classroom. Again, you'll see this as the parallel between these schools. But when there is a music program, it limits what PE can do because that program happens in where PE happens. Science happens in the classrooms, and there's no dedicated lab space, and currently no dedicated science teacher. So that often becomes a scheduling challenge. There's no dedicated CTE or space for student gardens there. Technology. This was one of the very few schools that we saw that had some challenges with their Wi-Fi. For the most part, the Wi-Fi at all schools is really, really good, with the exception of the study room here that has inadequate Wi-Fi coverage. For supervision and security, the main office location is not ideal. Visitors, happen to check in through the back or go in through the back is not ideal. But there is good passive supervision from all of the classrooms around the site. Site is fenced and secure, and the classrooms are locked, and there's one dedicated entrance but there's no secure vestibule. It's the buzz-in situation. Instructional aids, there's ample storage, but it's not easily accessed. It's outside, so you have to go outside to access some of that storage. There's some bulletin board space for display, but there's no three-dimensional display cases in the school. Some of the classrooms do feel crowded, especially at the junior high level, where there can be, depending on the grade or the year, there could be 25 to 34 students. The science, when they do have science in the classrooms, there's no sync for that science, so that's a bit of a challenge. Gym's relatively new space, as you can see in the lower left-hand corner, with good flooring. And the gym and basement are not good spaces for special education. Again, this is a challenge we see in some of these older schools. The HVAC has balancing issues, so it's too hot in some rooms and too cold, so it doesn't heat evenly. AC is provided through some of the window units. They do have high ceilings though and operable windows, so that gives kind of more of a stratum for good natural ventilation. And there's no windows behind the office, was one thing they pointed out, and no ADA accessibility to the basement, though they had noted they don't necessarily need to access the basement. No dedicated shared space, and the school is so small that relationships work well. And that's, again, a very similar thing we saw at all these schools. The relationships, they feel like they work well because it is so small. And there's one bus that parks in the front. There's a lot of walkers, and there's a neighborhood to the side of the school. We did ask the schools that we did educational adequacies at, kind of if there was a genie in the bottle and they had 3 wishes, and what, for improvements to their schools, what would those be? And we also asked them what they really liked about their schools, and, something that they may want to change. And at Prattam, one, they love their small school environment. It's a big reason why people go to Prattam, or students go to Prattam. They would like to add an additional classroom out there. We talked a little bit about that earlier, and have more extended learning opportunities. So places for some of those assistants were kind of, if they had those things from their perspective, and this is the staff's perspective that we spoke to and the principals, they'd be really happy. I think it's important that we really talk about that and kind of, for those communities, what do they see as something that is important to them? And that was something that they had talked about. So I think with that, maybe if we could spend 5 minutes and just on Prattam for some kind of observations and feedback. What are your thoughts on that? Kind of what you've heard, And again, we'll try to organize these as best we can so you can see the color coding related to these specific categories. Between Angela and I, we'll kind of do that. So any thoughts on Pradham and what we heard?
Jonah, hey, it's Aaron. Thanks for that info on Pradham. I think just as a guiding principle with Pradham and even some of our other outlying schools, as we even talked about last meeting, I think the one thing that you hit on the head was so important, and that's just listening to the communities, the individual communities, on whatever the plan might be. You know, we've talked about lots of different thoughts and ideas and great ideas about what could be, but I think it's so essential to make sure that we get the feedback from what they want, because again, these communities will need, with whatever we do at the end, if it is a bond or major investment, we're gonna need everybody on board for this. In order to do that, we're just gonna have to listen and take their feedback. Now, again, we know we can't meet every ask and every request by every, person in every community. But if we hear large themes, or we hear, a certain theme of what they really desire in their school, I think we really have to be cognizant to take that into account if we want to be fully successful. So.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Aaron, and thanks for that feedback. And quite candidly, and you'll see some parallels with the other schools, we hadn't done this before in the first batch, and we'll circle back on those schools and kind of ask the same questions. But they're not big asks, to be honest. So the things that we heard at Pradham, those aren't big asks. Now that withstanding, there are still some of the facility conditions that would need to be addressed and things like that, and accessibility. But it was really enlightening for us to hear firsthand, at Pradham, Aaron. Yeah. So any other feedback on Pradham? Any thoughts there?
As I understand, the gym was a community project with the co-op and the community. I mean, it's a very nice gym.
I have a question about that gym. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you, Josh. Yes.
They were able, from what I understand, to do that gym very affordable, and versus by avoiding prevailing wages. And this is rumors that I have heard of what that gym had cost. Is there a reason, if that is true, that was possible, which I'm all for? And if it was possible, why can that not be extended to other projects?
Josh, the way I understand it is that was done similarly to the football field, where it was kind of run through donations, almost like with the Silver Fox Foundation as a nonprofit. And so they were able to avoid prevailing wage. When you're talking about building a brand new school with a big construction company, there's no way you can afford that unless you had somebody that could build the building and then donate it to the school district or something along those lines.
So yeah, the prevailing wage is significant cost. That's obvious. We've heard instances, it goes to the level of, for instance, if you wanted to move a building off of a school site, and somebody wanted to move the building, while the building's on the site, they have to pay prevailing wage. But once it hits the highway, they can then pay whatever they want. So it is a sticky wicket, if you would. So for the school district to endeavor, there's just no way around prevailing wage.
Right.
That we've seen, other than volunteer projects with nonprofit, and I don't know the details of that.
When we originally looked at the first bond for the new middle school, we were actually looking at a situation where the building could actually be built off-site. There's a couple of companies in Washington, if I remember correctly, that would do that and basically assemble the buildings on site at prevailing wage. Most of the work was done off-site in the factory. That's an option.
And that is an
Yeah.
option. That is an option that we have dealt with as recent as last week. So Blazer Industries in Almsville is a modular building manufacturer, and we're not talking about just the portables. It's a modular building like you were proposing. You put the pieces together. All of that work is built in a factory off-site, and like you said, you haul them in and you put them up. We're getting ahead a little bit, but when we get to pricing, I can explain what Hillsborough School District just did with a modular building of 8,000 square feet. They're going back to a design build, stick built solution for their alternative ed building. So when we get to costing, I would be happy to drill down on that, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we want to put that one in the parking lot of ideas as an example, just so we can remember for us to address that.
Yeah,
at that
good
meeting.
idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that plan was actually pretty clever in that it created a module that was for K-12, and you repeated the module multiple times to create classrooms. But it's very rigid. I mean, you don't have the opportunity to do much configuration of space, but we certainly will be happy to discuss it.
Great. So the next school, if there's no other comments or feedback on Prattam, we'll move on to Central Howell. In cafeteria, there was a question: is the main need at Prattam an extra classroom in a cafeteria? And what we heard, at least from the group, was a classroom was exactly what they wanted. The cafeteria, Richard, I don't recall, or Aaron, I don't recall that being part of the discussion.
Yeah, they were okay with their cafeteria. I mean, and even their kitchen. You know, we looked at it and said, "Gee, you could use some upgrade your kitchens." But yeah, the cafeteria seems to work for them because they have a small enrollment.
Central Howell, we visited next, and it's a little bit larger. They have 7 classrooms with 9 grades. So still a cohort situation, some storage space in the basement being used for instruction, but there's not enough room for single grade classrooms. Again, ironically, when we asked, well, is that something that we should consider or look at? And they said, well, no, we really like the cohort situation. So kind of another similarity there. The library and the modular, though, is used for SPED, which limits its use, and that is a challenge, having the library and the modular. There's no cafeteria, and students eat in the classrooms, not dissimilar from Prattam. They do have a nice office, but no dedicated health room, and it takes up use of the staff bathroom when a student has an injury, so there's no dedicated health office for that. Adequate space for counseling, student restroom being used for health and wellness space. At the specialty programs, music operates in the basement, which you can see here in the upper left-hand corner. For the little kids, it works out okay, but for the middle schoolers, it can be, there's some headroom issues in that back riser. No dedicated science classroom, but they do have science storage. They'd like to have a garden or greenhouse, but there are concerns about vandalism. So this was one instance where there was a little bit of a disagreement amongst the staff, and some would like a greenhouse and others would not. They do have a good sized gym, as you can see here in the lower left-hand corner, with 2 walls that can be used. And it's used occasionally for community use with basketball every other week. The YMCA from Silverton does use it for volleyball and basketball, is what we heard. Technology, there's not enough power, especially at the middle school. It's one-to-one devices, so from that perspective, it's really great. The announcements don't work reliably. Student devices have cameras and document cameras, so again, that technology is good there. And they just got strobe and audible alarm in the office. They only have manual pull stations for fire alarm It's not connected to automatic fire response system. And security and fire alarm systems do need to be updated throughout. Supervision and security, some teachers can use the entire courtyard and some can see along front of the school. Modular building does create a blind spot though. And not every classroom has blinds for drills and active intruder scenarios. There's adequate fencing and the doors are keyed. So from a security standpoint, that's good. There's 1 camera at the main entry and 3 total exterior cameras, 1 at the gym and 1 at the office. But those cameras don't have a high enough resolution, and they could use a couple more throughout the campus. Middle school cubbies are open and overflowing. Locker space would be ideal for the middle schoolers. Teacher storage is okay. Tackable space in classrooms is good. There's no common corridors for student displays. Middle school has all new tables, a mix of new and old furniture throughout. Again, that's pretty common. And parents and anonymous donors have provided a lot of that furniture. Technology and whiteboards for instruction. The floor is dated. Space isn't conducive to music, so that's the music area. Obviously, you saw earlier. Ceilings are too low. The columns are in the way. No sinks or dedicated lab space, and no eye wash. And I think the no eye wash is something nobody else talked about, but I imagine it's the same at all those schools. They would like updated padding, and the flooring is a challenge. This is in the gym. Dust collects easily and becomes slippery. All the, that cement floor in the gym is a challenge for cleaning and slip resistance. There's no AC except for in the main office and portable, and poor thermostatic control. It does get hot in the summer and late spring with all those southern facing windows. The elementary school classrooms do get hot, and there's a shared gas furnace in the 1960s edition, so kind of a mix of HVAC systems. Also a mix of new and old windows with no natural ventilation in the office. Fresh air only when the windows are open, have to prop doors at gym to get ventilation. And the upstairs classrooms can hear music, so that acoustical separation is not very, very good there, or the acoustical separation between the office and the principal's office for some of those confidential conversations. And there's no accessible route to the music room. The gym is the only shared space. There's no covered walkway to the gym, and music and PE are shared. They could use a larger covered play area, and they have 2 buses currently, and that access has been improved with a large bus loop. Basically it's better than what it used to be, and the sidewalks have been improved as well. That being said, the field is not in very good condition, and the asphalt has a lot of dips and cracks, and of course dips and cracks fill with water and freeze during those cold inclement weather periods, so that's a bit of a challenge. Again, similar to Prattam with Central Howell, we asked what the wish list was, and those were more covered play, just more space for extended learning and small group activities, which we heard a little bit about that at Prattam, but that didn't that was also on their list. The middle school portion of the project, seeing a renovation there. And then of course, we have the portable that has the library in the classroom in. So, putting that into a permanent building is something that would be ideal there. Let's see here. So in the chat, we've got, are the gyms of both Victor and Central Howell sisters? Looks like the same floor plan. Also, that gym ceiling is in rough shape. Richard, you saw those gyms side by side. Do you recollect kind of from your perspective?
Yeah, that's what I wrote in the chat is the gyms. Yeah, they're very similar. Yeah, but I can elaborate on that. They do have a stage area, but they might also be a similar type construction, which is tilt-up concrete, which is a pretty common method and a very economical method. So it might be just a coincidence.
Any other thoughts and feedback on Central Howell? Kind of observations based on what you heard or what you know?
I have reached out to this community quite a bit, just through a proximity to the people that I kind of have day-to-day workings with. And one of the questions was about two things about this school, and I imagine it's not a whole lot different than Prattam, and that was reducing the amount of out-of-district transfers as a possibility. Some parents like the first, second, third graders together kind of a thing, and some parents don't. They feel like, well, my third grader's not really learning because they're doing first grade math and vice versa, and some parents like it. And that was going to be my question about you guys is, have you got any feedback on that from parents or staff out there?
From staff, what we heard is, again, Central Howell and at Prattam, and I'll answer the second part of the question. They like the cohort situation. Now, of course, they were talking about it from what they've heard from parents and from their perspective. And just like any group of, there's going to be people that probably don't like it, but my understanding is they do like that for the most part. Any thoughts on that, Richard?
I was answering something on the chat.
Oh.
We didn't talk about grade configuration, but we did talk about just how they use the spaces and what are they getting? Do they have the facilities they need to deliver the curriculum as it's been outlined at that school? So we didn't really delve into. We didn't drill down on grade configurations.
Yeah. Outside of just the they like the cohort. It was kind of like getting additional classrooms would be nice, but then that takes away from our small school, and we like having some of the mixed grade levels is kind of what we heard a little bit. But Richard's right. We didn't dive super deep into that. And I apologize, Josh, what was the first part of your question?
Sorry, the other portion was there seems to be a concern. Sorry, I'm a single dad right now. Was a concern about they were wanting a possible reduction of out of district transfers.
Gotcha, that's right. And I don't have any information on that.
I think that'd be great to put in the parking lot, and we can have the educators kind of address that. Because that's really not our area of expertise, but we did not hear anything expressed in that concern.
There's a wide range, of course, with the buildings, but it is kind of interest and maybe significant in what the age is. So I'm guessing Central Howell's, the original building is 1930-ish, and then those major additions were in the 60s and 70s. Am I close?
Mm-hmm. You are right. The 60s is the addition, and that's about 1930, 1940 for the main building.
So I put in the chat, somebody asked the question a while ago, but Prattam, Evergreen, and Central Howell, the original buildings are identical. Now, they've morphed and had additions. I apologize. They've morphed and changed, so they don't look exactly the same, but they've all had a kitchen on the lower level and kind of cafeteria and those restrooms where you go up some steps, and those are underneath a stage. And they all use them differently. So those original school buildings, I believe, were identical.
Yeah. Yeah, probably pretty similar to the original Victor Point as well. That's across the
yes.
street.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I'm trying to. Yes. But I hesitate because they don't have, you know, all those schools have a stage, and they now use it for a classroom. And the stage is what raises up, and that's where you go up steps to a bathroom that gives you extra head height. It's a very interesting design, but yeah. The common thread I always confuse Victor Point and Silvercrest, but at Victor Point, I believe, is that the basement is where they have the cafeteria. That's the common thread.
Any other thoughts, feedback on Central Howell before we move on to Evergreen?
By the way, when you're switching, now these interviews with staff are great for us so that we really begin to understand the school, the communities, the schools. It's very enlightening. Oregon Department of Education didn't give a lot of guidelines on how to do this educational adequacy. And we're very pleased with our process. And I got a memo just, the last month asking us questions about educational adequacy that were related exclusively to how much light's in the space, CO2 production, and how many square feet for each student. Those are all really good information, but educational adequacy goes beyond just how much light, is there CO2, and is there enough space? And so that's the part that we like about our process, because what you're getting is not just a bunch of facts and figures. You're really getting an insight into how the teachers use this space. Thank you, Joe. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. I'm just gonna look at just make sure that we're not missing something here on the chat real quick. And we'll record all of these too, so that we have those in the minutes. So moving on to Evergreen, core capacity. So there's no dedicated space for special education. There's 2 extra rooms that aren't used as classrooms, but are used for, but for each of those uses, rotating throughout the day. Curriculum is for push in, not pull out, so kids are incorporated into classrooms. And that's just talking about special education. The cafeteria doesn't serve food, or the school doesn't serve food. There's no lunch program, and the students eat in the classrooms. There's no copy room. And you'll see that the lunch program, the reason why it keeps coming up is because we're very pointed about that. Okay, well, let's talk about your cafeteria. It's a list. Well, we don't have a cafeteria and we don't have a food program. So there's no copy room and no dedicated principal's office. The library is on a stage, and 2 volunteer librarians run that library. They would like to have an accessible staff restroom. And then art, again, very similar, happens in the classrooms. Music program is beloved by the community, with several events that happen throughout the year. I think there's 4 major events that happen throughout the year from the music program. Science happens in the classrooms, and there was science recently added storage for 6-8. Dedicated CTE has never been a desire or a wish for them, because they know that they'll get that at the high school level. The sports field's in great condition. A covered play shed is used for rainy day recess. They would like a gym, so they don't have to stagger for inclement weather. The play shed's not large enough for a full middle school class. Playground and softball get used. The play shed is not used by the community, and this is talking about shared space. Kids in the community use the play structure, and the community feels very comfortable coming there and using some of that shared space. The power is a big need at the school. That would be an ideal thing for future-proofing the building. From an audio standpoint, talking about audio enhancement, the TVs project audio, so they thought that was adequate. And there's built-in PA system for the upper rooms. 4-5 grade cohorts 4-5 and 2-3 have coat rooms that obscure vision. So when we talked about passive supervision, that was a concern, is a hiding spot there. Partial fencing around the site with east, north, and west being fenced off, and the school feels secure. There's one camera at the front entry that's angled right above the door, and the parking lot is gravel. The school is very happy with storage and display opportunities. This is that again, that science storage that was recently added, and they really like that opportunity there. The covered play shed, though, has some challenges with the gates being removed, which allow birds to get in and roost. And it's too small. The structure of the covered play shed gets in the way of activity. So as you can see, there's challenges with kids running into those posts at times. 3 classrooms have window AC units, and many of those windows do need to be replaced. The indoor air quality at the middle school room specifically is not very good. The bushes restrict daylighting into the basement classroom, so that's just some of the vegetation that's in the way there. And the acoustics between spaces with the operable wall are poor. And again, some of those older operable walls have that challenge. There's only one accessible parking stall. And students don't walk to the school. There's no sidewalks on site. Again, at Evergreen, we asked kind of the wish list. And, probably not too surprisingly, one of them was a gym. Just more power in the classrooms, and a dedicated art music room. So really kind of what they talked about was a flexible room that could adapt to either art or music or maybe even science at times. And then of course more restrooms, so staff restrooms and student restrooms. And that was kind of, that was their list for Evergreen and what would make them happy from a staff perspective there. Let's maybe get some other thoughts on Evergreen here.
Hey, Jonah.
Something, yeah.
Jonah, could we put a comment about on Central Howell? One of its challenges is its proximity to the highway that was discussed in the chat. And I think it'd be a great place to put in the parking lot.
Right.
Because it is right on the highway and at an intersection. And the traffic is increasing on that highway. The Silverton Highway, is that correct? Thank you.
Evergreen is somewhat the same situation. It's very close to Cascade Highway, and it's there's a hill right there in the intersection, and a fairly dangerous intersection because of the hill.
I would like to ask a question to any parents that actually have kids out at Evergreen. I'm not familiar with this school directly. I mean, it's always been there as long as I've been around Silverton and part of the school district. I was born here. About how many of those kids are locally, like they're in the district for Evergreen, and how many of those kids are busing to Evergreen because they want that environment for their kids? Because it feels like to me there's going to be a lot of parents, they're choosing to go there because of what Evergreen represents. And that might be some of our resistance as a committee to doing or even coming close to touching it. So I kind of want some feedback there.
Yeah, Josh, I'll take that one since, all 3 of my kids went to Evergreen. I think you said it was dead on. I think there's a good mix of it. I would say, I don't know the numbers, but I would say right around 50-50 probably truly in district and then transfer in. Our family being one of them transferred in many years ago. Got an 8th graders. This is our last hurrah at Evergreen, albeit a little bit different than the standard years. So I would say, yeah, there's probably 50-50. And I don't know. Well, my kids, when we lived in a different part of town, were able to ride the bus because there was a bus stop, and we would walk them from our older house years ago to the bus stop, and they would ride the bus to Evergreen. So there was an in-town stop years ago for kids who went to Evergreen. I don't know currently how many kids take the bus. I would say a majority of them, their parents drop them off. Those that don't live, that aren't in the district. And I would think even those that are in district, given there are no sidewalks, there may be a handful of kids, I would say probably 5 or less, that actually walk, maybe even less than that. But everybody else is, whether it be in district or out of the Evergreen district, are driven and dropped off at school, or they ride the bus. There is, like I said, there is bus service for those kids that are in that district. Was there any other specific questions I could help you answer?
Yeah, I got a question that kind of goes to all 3 of those. So when you're saying for Evergreen 50-50, you're saying 50-50 that live in Silver Falls School District but go out to Evergreen, not like Salem Kaiser, other transfers. But when you're talking Prattam and Central Howell, or you have a lot more like Prattam, Salem Kaiser out of district transfers and Central Howell out of district, correct?
Yeah. I was saying, when I'm saying in district, Colin, I'm meaning Evergreen.
Evergreen boundary.
Correct, Evergreen boundary, and then other Silver Falls families that transfer in. We did have some transfers in from like Salem Kaiser or Salem Kaiser district. I think we had 1 or 2, if I remember right. At least, my kids were there. We may have 1 or 2 right now. I can't remember.
Hi, Colin.
Oh.
Can you hear me? I'm using earphones. I usually don't do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, the
terminology.
I hope it's not too loud. The terminology is if they're coming from outside the school district, we say inter-district, and if they're from inside the district going to a different school within the district, it's intra-district. So yeah, I think what Aaron was saying is you have a number of intra-district transfers to Evergreen. And yes, at Central Howell and Prattam, we have a high number of inter-district transfers coming from the Salem Kaiser side of the line there.
I can speak a little bit more to what Aaron was saying. My wife is a teacher at Evergreen, and I'm a longtime community member. So the number of intra-district transfers versus those are in district, it fluctuates a lot. You have some of the families out there who have large families, and so it kind of will vary a lot. What is consistent with Evergreen is there's always a waiting list, and there's always people that are waiting for that down enrollment so that they can get their kids into the Evergreen school.
Good point.
And Sean, what, from your perspective, why is that? Just out of curiosity, what is it about Evergreen that people gravitate towards and want to go to?
I think a lot of it, again, is the small school. Evergreen and Prattam, I think they kind of go back and forth on which one is the smallest. But that's where a lot of it is kind of gravitate toward the smaller school setting, the family feel, and excellence in education. They've always had very good teachers out there, and long-term teachers that are there for multi-generations really of who they're teaching.
And great points, Sean. And going along with that, I think we consistently have had very solid test scores at Evergreen. We've always rated pretty well, and I think people also come out there because they do like the mixed grade approach rather than the single grade approach. I think with the younger kids get in some ways mentored by the older kids. The older kids, kind of help pull them along. Sometimes things are a little harder when they're, say, in 6th grade, but by the time they're in 8th grade, they've really kind of gotten pulled along, and have learned some of their skills. And But yeah, I think that mixed grade approach is something that we, in many districts don't have anymore throughout the country. And, we're fortunate to have that at several of our schools, but I think that is also a draw at Evergreen.
Hey,
Great.
I had a question too for Steve that Steve might be able to answer. Somebody told me at one point, and this might just be, rumors, but that Prattam got some kind of additional funding from Marion County or Salem for the kids that came from the Salem Kaiser district. Is that anything you've ever heard of, or is that just?
No, I'm not sure what that would be about. I mean, we inter-district transfer students, they do become members of our school district, and we receive the state school funding
Right.
at the same amount that we would for any other students that live within the Silver Falls School District boundary. But no, I'm not familiar with that. But if you had any other information that might trigger something that, maybe there was something at some point, I don't know, but not through our regular state school funding mechanism, there wouldn't be.
Great. Thanks, team.
Yeah.
So moving on to the last K-8 that we visited was Silvercrest Elementary, and got that feedback there. And they, let's see, we'll move this guy out of the way here. They have 10 classrooms. It's 10 classrooms with LRC that counts as a classroom. The SPED does not have enough space for one-on-one instruction. Hallways are often used. There's 2 lunch periods. They make it work, but they feel like it's not large enough. The office is a shared space with the copier, and teacher and aides use it to copy, and it's a little distracting from the noise perspective. There's no dedicated teacher workroom or lounge. There's no dedicated counseling office, and the staff don't have their own restrooms. For the specialty programs, dedicated music room that works well, but they don't currently have a program, serves as a flex space for needs at the time, and there's no dedicated space for an art room. They have a greenhouse that gets good use periodically. Again, no staff lounge for staff to congregate. Community use happens in the gym. Technology, there's more power was installed last year. They were pretty happy about that. TVs in every classroom, again, they're happy about that. Older fire alarm system salvaged from another school, and some newer strobes and emergency lighting. Occasional beeping and errors happen there, though. Good visibility throughout for supervision and security, but the kids can hide in that greenhouse area. Fencing around the site with no panic hardware at older fencing around the field, so that's a challenge. The northeast gate is the most concerning area across from the playfield. There's currently 1 buzz-in camera at the main lobby, and there's no other cameras around the site. Teachers have adequate storage, but students have very little communal storage. Storage in 1 classroom per 3 rooms, where some backpacks are left outside the classroom, and a lot of the classroom chairs need to be replaced. Classrooms in SPED need to be repainted. The music has music storage, but there's no space for art. Science equipment is old, but serves its purpose, and the greenhouse currently isn't operational. So it does work at times, but right now it's not operational. For the learning environment, 1 teacher has AC with balancing issues in the main building. Again, very similar. Some rooms are too hot, some too cold. No windows in the music room. There's a disparity in kind of the windows locations. Cafeteria recirculates air through adjacent rooms, so they get all those good smells there. There's no windows in the music room, and it's very noisy in the main building. You can hear other teachers from down the hall. Cafeteria is not accessible, and the main building has a ramp, but that wood ramp is a slip hazard, especially in wet weather. And the classes, they're all, from a relationship of spaces standpoint, they're all close enough to the library and cafeteria. They would like more covered outdoor play area. They have 3 buses, but the bus proximity is good. Parking access is an issue with no dedicated high school parking. Field across from school is used as parking, and the asphalt around the gym needs to be cleaned and sealed. Some kids walk to school, but there are no sidewalks. There's a bike rack that secures 4 bikes there. And again, asking them what they would like to have seen. I've got this in front of me right now. Let's see here. Just gonna find it right here. A covered play structure as well. Kind of more restrooms. The gym with the floor, it's concrete. They'd prefer a covered floor. Some accessibility improvements and centralized staff workroom lounge. So that communal space for the staff is something that they would have liked to have seen. So any thoughts, feedback, observations from Silvercrest?
I'm on mute.
There's a question.
So I did want to make a comment that the music room media center is constructed inside an old bus barn. So it does have a structural issue where the walls are bowing out. So I mean, they're pretty happy with it, but it certainly is a sketchy building. But the space inside is very nice.
Can I maybe put this out to Sean? So Sean, you teach it at Silvercrest, if I'm correct. Any input from your perspective as a teacher?
Well, a lot of my input, Aaron, is on the form that he put there.
Okay.
Of course, I'm very biased. I love my school. The covered play area is, definitely something we're looking at. Our Boosters Club is doing a great job raising money. As some of you know, we get a lot of interesting weather, shall we say, up in the hills, and sometimes up to a couple feet of snow. But then trying to fit everybody into the gym, 144 kids in the gym, gets a little bit crazy at times. So we are hoping for that. But yeah, we have, dreams of a little bit more CTE going on. We would love to have a dedicated music and art program because we have the room for it, so yeah. And I can answer any other questions you guys have.
Yeah, Sean.
It's apparent that Evergreen, Central Howell, Prattam have had what I would call somewhat, not really extensive, but additions. Gym, Central Howell added a number of classrooms and a gym. Evergreen added the classroom and a play shed. I don't see, or the question is there any really significant in terms of 2 or 3 or 4 classrooms that have been added in the last 40 years or so at Silvercrest?
So have we added some buildings at Silvercrest? Is that what it comes to?
Yeah, has that been pretty much a static site with relatively minor changes to the structure?
Actually, there's been some major added buildings is what it comes down to. So the original is the original building, which, like has already been mentioned, very similar to the footprint of Prattam, Central Howell, Victor Point. And then it had that bus barn gym that they were talking about. They had their own bus. When they were their own school district, they had their own bus, which basically was a lean-to building on the side of their gym, which is now our library. So yeah, there's probably some funky non-code issues going on there when they put that together. There have been 2 other classroom sites built with 3 classrooms in each building. So that's a total of 6 different classrooms added at different times. I couldn't tell you the dates of those, Ray, but it was at different times. And then our gym was done in the late 80s, early 90s.
So I have some data I pulled up here. 1950 on the classrooms, the original gym 1970. 1 classroom building 1975, another one 1978, and the last one in 1982. And then a gym classroom in 1987. That's from the facilities assessment at Silvercrest. Okay, just double checking.
Sounds about right.
And Sean, you mentioned a CTE program. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more, as far as
Well, it'd be
what
more
your
of
wish
like
and
the
desire would be
area
there?
of, it'd be more of the area of like ag. I mean, we're in a farming community. Our land was donated to us by local farmers up there. There be some cool things and partnerships that we could do. We also have the Drake's Crossing Fire Department just really close by. We have a nursery that delivers to places all over the West Coast. I just see lots of partnering with our community that could go together. That would be very cool, I think. And that was kind of the vision of the Parents Club at the time, who put together the greenhouse site for us. They raised the money for that. And we have room. We could add into that outside gardens, things like that. You know, from there, I don't know. But that's kind of a starting spot idea there. I think I saw a question if we have modulars. We don't have modulars. They are actual buildings.
Great. Any other questions, feedback on Silvercrest?
Hey, Jonah, just before we move on, and I don't mean to go back to the other 3 we did before, with Prattum, Evergreen, Central Howell, was any input for like CTE or any type of education in that realm brought up in terms of their wish list? I didn't remember seeing it in in your discussion, but do you remember if anything had been brought up in that area?
That's a good question, Aaron. Silvercrest was really the only one that they had expressed the desire for CTE. I think it was Evergreen. One of them explicitly said that they never had a desire or wanted CTE, which I thought was interesting feedback to hear. Let's see, I can't remember which one it was.
So Aaron, we did ask. We have a checklist that we go through, and every one of those we did ask about CTE. So if it doesn't show up, we at least ask. So I think what you're seeing is that it's some school. What I found is every one of these K-8s have something that is unique about them with program, and they really build on that. Whether it's a CTE program, or a CTE music program, and there's always seems to be something that's unique about that school that they build upon, as opposed to trying to be everything to everybody like comprehensive large elementary.
Gotcha. That's a good point. I appreciate you, Richard, that you said that you asked that question to all of them. So I think that's important. So thanks.
Yeah, and just to elaborate a little bit on that, we do ask about it a couple different ways through our checklist here. So we ask about, one, do you have it? And if you do, what is it? And do you have adequate space for that? And then we ask the condition of it as well. And then we kind of double back on and ask, is that a desire? If you don't have it. And Silvercrest was the only one of these 3 that they had expressed the desire. And they had expressed the desire. And then we asked the condition of it. And then we double back on and ask, is that a desire? If you don't have it. And Silvercrest was the only one of these 3 that they had expressed the desire. And then we asked the condition of it. of this batch that we'd heard a desire, specific desire for CTE. And I don't know if that's just you know, we've never had it, so we never, you know, really wanted it kind of thing, or if it's just, you know, hey, we get it at the high school and we don't really need it at the K-8 level. Okay. So last but not least is Silverton High School. So we had a very good conversation with that staff right before we left for the summer. It was a very long meeting, as you can imagine, just because it's a very large staff. And we had invited, you know, the department heads and various staff. I think it was a big group. So we got a lot of really good feedback from Silverton High School. The student to classroom ratio is adequate, not necessarily conducive to group work though. I think when it was planned, there wasn't really extended learning opportunities planned in there, like i.e. learning commons and small group rooms as much. They've had to modify space to allow for SPED over the last few years. Commons would be small if it wasn't for an open campus. So what they're saying is the Commons works, but if we weren't an open campus, we would need more lunch periods for all the students. There's inadequate room for in-school suspension, and there's not enough conference space to work with the students. The media center is used for staff meetings, and sightlines aren't great for large groups. Inadequate staff restrooms from their perspective, and there aren't enough gender-neutral restrooms. Traffic flow problems at the student restrooms. We see traffic flow as a bit of a challenge at the high school. It's kind of what we've heard quite a bit there. Choir and drama have several events a year that are over capacity. Science has too much square footage for labs, which that'd be a first that I've heard that being a challenge, but they really wanted more direct instruction in the science rooms and less lab space is kind of, or maybe just more direct instruction space. Athletics and PE share space, which limits PE curriculum, and there's no extended learning opportunities for SPED. Technology, there's very little space for student charging. The overall power distribution is adequate. Wi-Fi is unreliable at times. There is voice enhancement in the newer wing, the last phase that was built, but not the older one. And the older wing does not have projectors installed in the classrooms. They come in with a push cart. The fire alarm is mostly current. Supervision and security, there's 3 main access points with a lot of different sight lines being obscured on the east side. We got quite a bit of feedback on the supervision and security aspect. There's no dedicated secured vestibule, and access to and from the CTE building is not secured. Building camera coverage is adequate, but site camera coverage is not. Doors in the B wing can only be locked from the outside, and controlling the campus in case of an emergency can be a challenge at times. From an instructional aids perspective, the school has ample student and teacher storage. The A wing has tackable wall coverings, while the B wing has more like dedicated tack boards. There's a lot of distributed displays for art and student achievement. Classrooms aren't set up for multiple learning modalities. They were very explicit about that. It's very much kind of your standard, traditional model, and not so much the studio configuration. The pottery room has inadequate ventilation. Faucets are not durable and they often leak. Science prep room adjacencies are not ideal, so they're not coupled at some locations. The CTE building room leaks and the locks are an issue. They'd like outdoor covered space for outdoor athletics and bus drop-off pickup in the stadium and tracker offsite at Silverton Middle School. Ventilation exchanges throughout the building are inadequate and there's no user control over temperature. Not enough exhaust throughout the building. Most classrooms have windows or skylights. The large assembly spaces don't have good acoustics. Auditorium acoustics do not travel evenly to the back of house. And the elevator and stair access is problematic in areas. relationship with spaces is generally good relationship throughout. The program could benefit from outdoor covered area. Student drop off and pickup gets congested, necessitating 3 separate access points. The pedestrian access on site is good, but pedestrian access to the site is inadequate. And it'd be ideal to have the stadium on campus. As we know, it's at the Silverton Middle School site at the Schlater campus there. So that was kind of some of the feedback that we got there. They actually did have a wish list too, and this was actually coming from the students when we met with them. And actually, it was a list that was provided by the students. And the students, if they kind of had anything they wanted, it would have been a covered outdoor area, more gathering communal space, and to grow the health room because it's too small. And to fix some of the circulation challenges at the stairs and the kiosks and those student restrooms. Those are kind of some of the big ticket items at the high school that they saw there. Any other thoughts and feedback at Silverton High School that we want to capture?
I'll throw it out there. Just, I mean, this isn't necessarily relevant in educational, but it does is, parking is always an issue there at the facility. I know that didn't necessarily come up on your list. We did expand and were able to get that property a few years back and did push out and put that gravel parking lot in there, but that has some challenges as well. It's gravel, it gets soggy. It's definitely a not ideal spot for parking. But that is one always thing as a parent going there for activities, that always is a challenge, is parking.
Gotcha.
I would make a comment that suddenly I realized the comments that you're getting from staff, which are very good, we have to realize that's a comment from those staff members at this point in time. The reason I realized that is because the science people said there was too much lab space. And I taught in the science classroom in the new wing. I think that's the B wing now. And the only reason we were crowded for space is because we had to get 28, 29, or 30 desks in the classroom. I don't believe there was an overabundance of space dedicated to labs. So I would disagree with that comment. But the point is, we need to remember that comments that people are making are good, valid, but again, they are just a snapshot at this particular moment.
Yeah. And it's funny, when I heard that, I was wondering what your thoughts would be on that, Ray, knowing that you'd been a science teacher there.
I want to add on to the parking thing real quick. On Grant Street, that area is been getting a lot of complaints from the community at the end of school, like pickup time. That area is a mess as far as parents trying to pick up kids on the backside. And I don't know if there's anything to do about it. I think the school's done everything they can, but it is something worth mentioning.
And that's the parking on the backside, Josh, is a mess.
Correct. Yes, on the backside.
Wasn't there some traffic flow changes that were made this past year as well to try to help curb some of that? I remember that they were not letting kids in and out. You couldn't drop off on that side for a while. You had to come in off the main, through the main entrance.
You can't come in off of Western into the back entrance. They locked that off with a gate. You can still go off of Grant into that turnaround loop and drop off. The issue, one of the biggest things I think people realize now is when we opened the second phase, we also shut down the old high school. And so you had no traffic from there. Well, when the middle school got moved, all of a sudden now you created double traffic because the middle school is getting people dropped off on James and everything. And so Florida and James and Grant are all real congested.
Yeah. Thanks, Colin.
Any other thoughts, feedback on? We're doing great on time. We're sticking right on time. Appreciate that, everybody.
I would just second that. I can't remember which street it is that goes in from James, but the north-south street. But it's just narrow with a lot of residential stuff, houses on each side. And I know that a couple years ago, someone got hit there and killed.
Oh, okay. So when we look at all of these, and we shared with you last time the matrix for the upfront schools, we see, again, this is just revisiting what we saw last time for the schools we visited then. Scotts Mills, Robert Frost, Butte Creek, Victor Point, Mark Twain in the middle school. If you take the total score and you average out the building average score, now remember 0 is not adequate, 1 is marginally adequate, and 2 is adequate. Getting that composite score, you see that really the only schools here that are below marginally adequate are Scotts Mills, Robert Frost, Mark Twain in the middle school, from the perspective of educational adequacy. If you go to what we just saw today, Prattam, Central Howell, Evergreen, Silvercrest, Silverton High School. Again, Prattam is 1.3, Central Howell is 1.0. Evergreen was scored really high from their perspective at 1.7, and Silvercrest was 1.3. So this one was surprising to me, Silverton High School, when we talked. But as we walked through some of those, and for the reasons that were outlined earlier, that got a little bit lower than marginally adequate from their perspective as it relates to educational delivery. So, I think we want to pause here just to see if there's any kind of observations, correlations between these. And I'll just offer one up from my perspective as I was going through this and putting it together. From an educational adequacy standpoint, the out-of-town schools, for the most part, score much higher than the in-town schools. And that's from staff and teachers' perspectives. The only one that scores lower than marginally adequate is Scotts Mills. But, you look at Robert Frost and you look at Mark Twain in the middle school, and even the high school, those from the staff perspective scored lower than marginally adequate. And so I think there's a variety of things that could be feeding into that. But one thing that it does tell, at least me from an outsider's perspective, is the staff, the community of those out-of-town schools really think highly of the educational delivery and the ability for the building to support that. But that's an outsider's perspective. More importantly, I'd like to hear your perspective on kind of maybe some of those correlations and just general thoughts on educational adequacy feedback now that we've gone through all of those.
Well, I find it fascinating that two of the schools that technically need the most help score very high, and most of the buildings in the district, in the city, score rather low, even though they structurally are pretty good in a lot of respects. It makes me think that a lot of it has to do with the community involvement And I am also going to be curious to see if we were to reevaluate that in a year after school is actually in session in the buildings. If we're going to the K-5 model for Mark Twain and Robert Frost, if it won't make a big difference in their scoring as a form of adequacy. I think that's been a bigger factor than what the community realizes.
So Tom, yeah. I wanted to support what you just said in a different way, which is the K-8 community schools, and Sean might reflect on this a little bit, but we found that the schools were somewhat protective of their school as being adequate. It was almost like they didn't want to score it too low so that their school looked good. So I'm not sure which one comes first, the pride in the curriculum that they're delivering, or the fact that they want to make sure that everybody knows they have a good school. So that part became a trend. We actually had to go into the conversation saying, this is not a competition. Your school is not going to be evaluated based on this score. This is just a tool for us to ask the questions and get, again, the annotated feedback is what we really like. So it is kind of interesting that the K-8 community schools, generally, they meet the needs of that community.
Well, and that's just kind of it, Richard, is that it is a sense of community that's very strong. There is, if you know the history of the district, we were all our own individual school districts.
Yes.
And so then when we all became one district, there were schools experienced different levels of trust and mistrust with that process, which is understandable. But I also believe, and Tom kind of hit on this, I really do think that the in-town schools going to the K-5 model will find that their sense of community is going to go up significantly. If we look at Philadelphia, who went to a K-8 model, it did take them, I think they said, 5 years before that community and those new K-8s really started to build. But when it did, it took off. Us being a smaller town, I really think those K-5s are going to develop an excellent community quickly.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And again, it's that same thing. You have a student who's going to go to Mark Twain for 6 years, and you're part of the community. And so if you have a second grader and a fifth grader, those brothers and sisters go to the same school. So I totally agree with you. And I think you see it in your K-8s. You're going to see it in your K-5. And I think that's a good reflection on the values of the community as a whole. They're the same. It's just how you construct the schools that support those. So I thank you. I think you hit it right on the head.
I have to say that I think that part of that, maybe making it seem like your school is better than it might really be educationally, is that there's such a fear that we're going to close those schools. And that's like their first instinct. I mean, for example, we sent out a survey about Mark Twain and Robert Frost and their configuration, and you wouldn't believe the amount of people that responded, don't close the K-8 schools. Well, it has nothing to do with it.
Right.
But it's such a fear, and it's the staff and the families that I think that kind of overshadows a lot of this.
Melissa, and I think that's a really important point, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. And when Richard had spoke earlier about them kind of wanting to score higher, I think a lot of that is that. I think that there's obviously a genuine desire to keep their configuration and keep their school and that sense of community the way it is, and that is really kind of precipitating this, maybe desire to come at it with, a higher level to show that they're scoring higher in a sense. And we had principals that were very good about, okay, let's be brutally honest. Let's not, we're not sugarcoating things here, And so, but one thing that was very clear and apparent was they love their schools. There was no doubt about that.
And I've heard them, many in those communities say many times, we just want to be left alone. So I think, this committee being a district committee coming in and meddling in their business, they're trying to, say, no, leave us alone, we're fine. But I think we can see that their buildings aren't fine.
Right.
Go ahead.
I also was wanting to ask Lauren, I don't think he's on here tonight, but I think I kind of having a problem with the first off 1 to 3. I think is a really tight scale and can send your numbers one way really fast. But 2, you're talking about, I don't want to say that education inadequacy is not good, but you also need to look at, say, Robert Frost. I had an issue with Robert Frost numbers from the beginning. Now, I don't teach there. I've never worked there. I did go to school there. I've had kids that go to school there. And I understand that some of that might not be ideal. But when you're talking about structurally how Robert Frost compares to Silverton Middle School and their scores are different or like they are, I just don't think you can compare. That's not comparing apples to apples. So I understand this is a part of it, but I think throwing these numbers out there really are skewing things. And I think the other thing about Silverton High School is you also have a bunch of teachers that have maybe only taught at Silverton High School, have only come from other high schools. They haven't taught at Mark Twain. They haven't taught at any other school. So I think that's kind of a bunch of issues that come in, and it just seems like we're kind of starting to cause more divide again, which is what we don't need.
And I taught at Robert Frost for years, and now I'm at Silverton Middle School. And the Silverton Middle School is much different and needs more help than Robert Frost did. So I'm not sure those numbers either, as someone who's taught in that building for 20 years and I'm in the middle school now. I see those, that's just not accurate in my opinion.
So, and I'm going to reiterate, because I agree with it. I don't want this committee to take these numbers as absolute. It's a requirement that ODE puts on getting the awesome grant. We use it for, again, the annotations that go with it, we think is so much more important. And this is a great dialogue that everybody is hearing it and really is beginning to understand your entire school district, which we think is really valuable in building a district-wide long-range facility plan. So I think you're doing a great job.
I have a point here that I'd like to, sorry. Go ahead, Jonah.
Oh, no, you go ahead, Josh, because I was going to segue.
I think what we're touching on here is, I think, super important in going to a lot of the underlying things. I did post something in the chat that I actually would like. I would like it if that each individual breakdown, not the gross numbers, but all the stuff underneath to each subject that you asked about, even CTEs, if we could get that to each committee member so we could chew on that individually and kind of come up with those anomalies would be, I think, really beneficial. The other point that, we're talking about maybe the length of involvement and maybe the teachers, well, a lot of it is the students that are also at that school. And, if you look at how some schools test higher than others, seems to be a little bit of a difference between some of the outlying schools testing higher than maybe some of the in schools at that grade level. There is a report to show that. And I feel like that would also have something to do with people feeling better about their school, despite the physical appearance of it as well. So, yeah, we're number 7th in the state, or we're number 1. That does a lot to build up a lot of community, even though your building may not last another 10 years. So I think we're kind of getting to the root issue of what we're going to face as a committee going forward, of how we're going to get this done and have to talk about these things.
Yeah, and I think before we segue into the next section, the comment about the divide and kind of in town versus out of town has always been an interesting one for me. And one thing I just want to share from, at least again, from an outside observer's perspective, that's collecting information and data and talking to these schools. I don't know about you, Richard, but I didn't get the sense of, I didn't see that, you know, from, at least from their perspective. It wasn't a, you know, like, what are we doing this for? Why? There was never that, just for, at least in that conversation, there was never that. It was kind of like, we want to talk about our school, you know, and it was, you know, it was interesting because they were just very proud to talk about their school. I mean, they really were. So I think that's kind of that's just anecdotal from my perspective as an outside observer, but I thought that was pretty interesting there. I think Colin kind of tipped us off into maybe a good segue as it relates to, you know, we can't just look at the educational adequacy to evaluate the schools. And I know that we've looked at this in the past a little bit, and I think that was a little bit more before we came on board, but we wanted to kind of look at all that really great work that was done at the building condition assessment level and kind of give our impressions from an overview perspective. So I'm going to leave this one up to Richard to talk through because he's just really great at that.
So first off, Lauren can't be with us tonight because he's moving. What I'm going to show you is he had an opportunity to review it, but if you look at the assessment, it's pages and pages of spreadsheets, and each building has its own spreadsheet. So what you've been through a little bit of that. So what I'd like to do is give you a refresher course on what is the assessment about. And then we have some bar charts that show you all of your schools and kind of how it breaks down. So we're happy to give anyone the detailed spreadsheets that they care to look at. But we would like to kind of give you some sense of the big picture going forward. So first thing I wanted to do was kind of remind you what the process looked like. So every school, obviously the base information, it's name of the school, its location, the school district, because they changed the cost models depending upon those numbers that in a case of danger. Okay. I was reading the chat line. So the location, square footage of the school, and how many buildings on site. So each building gets a number and you have to do it. They are observable systems. So what that means is we aren't drilling holes, we're not digging deep. No, you're walking around with a checklist, which is the architects walk through it. We did not do your study, but another firm that we're familiar with that does a great job did the work. You have architects walk around and look at the building. You have civil engineers look at the site improvements. Tom, these are the BBL reports. We're using their data. Mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and low voltage, so all the building systems. So the process requires that you go through and look at all the buildings, do the observe, and then you compare it to replacement cost. It's just a comparison. The way you develop the model cost of what repairs cost is in the Oregon Department of Education's spreadsheet. You check a box and it populates with the number. So and then that number of repair compared to replace is an FCI, Facility Condition Index. There's some parameters in corporate industry like hospitals or even universities that once they get to a certain FCI, they have to do a major upgrade. And if it gets too high, they even consider replacement of the building. I'm not going to get into those numbers because that's a different model from schools that the community owns. The last piece is they have checklists that are just questions. They're yes and no questions. They don't really drill down. And you can see on security, they don't really address anything beyond, does it have a fence around the school? Is the access, is the entrance to the school have access control such as you can monitor who comes and goes? It just asks the question, does it generate any costs? Same thing with accessibility. Is there wheelchair access? Is there an elevator connecting floors? Information technology. You have good information technology, by the way, based on our educational adequacy reviews. And then, of course, hazardous materials. And you all know hazardous materials, asbestos in flooring, in insulation, pipe fittings. So this is the quick overview of, it's just a walkthrough assessment of a multidisciplinary team of architects, engineers, and civil, mechanical, electrical engineers. There's not even really a structural analysis. There is a separate TAP grant, technical assisted program TAP grant, that does seismic reviews. So this is just a real quick overview. Now I want to show you the results. So first slide.
Yeah, and real quick, Richard, you mentioned, obviously Lauren couldn't be here tonight and we wanted him to talk a little bit about it. But Tom, I believe, did you help out with this effort? Because I thought I saw you'd given a little bit of a synopsis on the second long-range facility planning meeting. Is that correct, or? And so I think any kind of insight as we move through would be good.
That is correct. Tom did do that. Are you there, Tom?
Oh, sorry, I stepped away for just a minute. I'd see, what was the question again?
No worries. So, we wanted Lauren to talk a little bit about this up front. He couldn't make it tonight, but my understanding, and Josh substantiated that, was that you had helped out with this, with BBL in that second meeting and reported out a little bit.
Well, I'd kind of gone through the report a bit, and obviously I wasn't involved in the study itself, it was a giant project. It was a little bit interesting trying to sort out the pieces because, for example, in middle school, they didn't really separate out the cost of the modulars. And what they really did was, at each building, for the whole district actually, they went through and identified things that would bring it up to speed from a more or less a code perspective, but not necessarily for a flow perspective. So it wouldn't be the cost of creating a new structure or one that's like a modern facility. It was simply to correct asbestos, fire, alarm systems, getting all the digital stuff up to speed, modernizing the heating systems, etc. But it still did not address a lot of the basic issues, and it was a little bit unclear, like the cost of the middle school restructuring. The original building, for example, they talked about making it earthquake proof, only 1.5 million. But they didn't really discuss how much of the building would need to be remodeled to make it at capacity for the student body that is there. So as we talked about at the previous meeting, realistically, the middle school, the main building has, between the gym and the building itself, has probably 90% of the space that the middle school currently needs. Granted, it may not be very good space, but that would be a huge difference in the cost of getting the building back up to speed.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, thanks for that. Thanks for that input, Tom. Yeah, so kind of what we've done here is just, again, looking at that information. And sorry, Richard, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
So actually what Tom was saying is spot on, and I'm going to show you, we've got some distinguishing information. So the author of this ODE assessment tool acknowledges that it is not a tool that you use to create a long-range facility plan. It is supplemental information. So what ODE is trying to make a point of, okay, if you just, like Tom said, if you just went in and fixed what you got, don't change instruction, don't change anything, just fix what you've got. This is how much it would cost. If just fixing what you got needs to be compared to the replace building a whole new school. And even that is a fallacy, because if you look at how schools are designed today compared to how they were in the 50s or the 40s, there's some spaces that don't exist. For instance, just think about the office, the school office. There's a principal, there's assistant principal, there's a counselor, there's a health room. This list of other spaces aren't in the school, so it's really not apples to apples. The only comparison that's apple to apples is square footage. So all of these budgets are generated by how big is the building. So what I show you right here, and these, I'm not giving the spreadsheet because it's really a lot of numbers. Like Tom said, it's a very large endeavor. So what we've done is we've created these bar charts with the actual data so that you can do a comparative analysis. But this is just the piece that is fix up what you got. So no real surprise, there is the middle school. That's the biggest bar. And you can see the colors, and on the right, I've given you the description of what those are, but that's the way the spreadsheet is organized. Site work is the review of the civil engineer, equipment and furnishings. You even talk about the equipment in the school. Tom referenced mechanical, electrical. They call it systems, but that big yellow piece are mechanical and electrical, all of those plumbing, all the systems that go into a comprehensive school. Great. Okay. Our newest building is number 2. I was going to get to that. Then you've got interior finishes. That's doors, walls. Are they needing replacement? The doors, even if the doors have old knob hardware on them, they need to be changed to ADA accessible. So that's a lot of the door replacement. The building enclosure, that's code for roof and walls. That building needs a lot of work to the roof and the walls. And the last blue bar is substructure. That's the only structural piece you'll see on those. So no surprise, middle school is the number 1. It's we have escalated these, by the way, Tom, from when it was done because a year has passed. So we've added escalation per ODE. So it is just to fix the middle school. You can see the number right there. We're not really talking about reading the numbers. It's the relationship. And that's a really good question. I forgot who asked it, but why is your, Wally, thank you. Why is your newest school the second largest expense? And remember, this is all created by square feet. Your biggest square footage building, if it was comparable, had a comparable concerns of one of your other schools, it's going to naturally be bigger because you have more square feet. So that's not really surprising. I'd say we got to look at Robert Frost and Mark Twain that are pretty close, and they're a lot smaller. So the reason that line is so big is because it is a bigger school. It's yeah, that's the high school. You can see there's something going on with the mechanical electrical systems, and then there's something going on with the building enclosure. I presume that's roofs. So that's why that number is so big.
Can I interject? Yeah, for the high school, I believe there's a estimated bill of about $8 million just for roofing.
Big area, lots of roof. So thank you, Tom.
Tom, isn't there something as well with the HVAC system in the yellow? I was told that by somebody that works there or somebody that had been down there. There was something wrong with the whole HVAC system was what, 20 some years old now or plus, and that needed to be upgraded.
Yes, the issue with the HVAC system, I don't know how much the mechanicals are a problem, but the digital controls are now outdated, and getting parts is a challenge. And that's a significant cost. They actually need to go through and replace a lot of the controls.
So this was just, again, engineers and architects walked through the building, made a check on a box, and it generated these costs. So these are developed costs. So we're going to talk about that next time. Again, it's back to the cost here reflects the development costs that go on top of just the basic construction. So this is a real project cost as opposed to a construction cost. And you'll learn more about that next week.
So in that report, do they break it down on cost per square footage? So if you add up all the cost of each school based on the square footage of the school, does it give a cost per square foot to do these upgrades?
Oh, no, but you could. What it does give you is the FCI, which is a percentage of repair versus replacement. So you certainly can do the math, but they have different needs. So you can see the improvements are all over the place, but looks like mechanical across the district needs to be addressed, and then the building enclosure across the district, because there's all kind of proportional numbers that look there, that look similar based on the square footage. Be happy to share that with you, but we don't have that number right now. I mean, we have to run the math on it. So I've got another chart, and I'm not going to go to it yet because I don't want to leave that, of other things that need to be included. This might be some of the things to which Tom was referring, which are making it better. So we'll talk about that next. But what I wanted to point out, and somebody did in the chat, here is Mark Twain and Robert Frost. Those are both bigger schools. They both have similar kind of heating and ventilating problem, and Mark Twain has a bigger roof problem. Now, what's interesting is, okay, these are the K-8s. Here's the high school, and here's the middle school. Look at these community schools. Their dollar needs are much smaller because they are smaller schools. Butte Creek is 34,000 square feet. It's a little bigger. That is comparable to I want to say Silver Crest. So, but it is interesting. All these K-8s don't have a whole lot of needs dollar-wise, but they love their schools. So
have you ever had a district, or would it be, when you're talking cost per square footage, what if you broke it down to cost per student based on enrollment?
Oh yes, all the time. So yes, cost per square foot per student. So you have to establish how many square feet do you want to allocate for a student. I mean, there's numbers we can crunch. So we do believe capacity is an important discussion about this. And then how you calculate capacity can vary a lot. The way we do it is how many students is your target class size and how many instructional spaces do you have? You multiply your number of instructional spaces by your target enrollment, and that's your median capacity. You always can get a little bigger, a little smaller, but that's kind of the baseline that you should use for evaluating capacity. We can go through this capacity analysis and develop a formula that works for Silver Falls School District. Did that answer your question? Okay, so this is the ODE. This is right from their spreadsheet. Next slide, Jonah. This is other systems. Tom, you may have been part of this, but this was created primarily under Lauren's direction of those parts and pieces that weren't covered in the ODE assessment that really the school needs. Some of them are operation and maintenance. Some of them in here are proposing a gym addition. I believe at Evergreen, there was a comment, it's like, well, they need a gym. So it was put in this category. Somebody just asked about site work. Site work in the first slide was primarily what's there, again, parking lots, sidewalks. This one, and I'll get to that, this is a different criteria. And I'm assuming you've asked that question because look at that big long line for Silverton High School. A lot of green there. I'll come back to that because I do know that answer. So in this, this is the other list. This is above and beyond what you saw on the first list. So there's some of these are mechanical systems that need to be just, excuse me, the building enclosure. There's a lot of reference to replacing wall systems that really weren't part of the assessment tool. And in those cases, they need to be captured. This is everything that can be captured that needs to be included that is not. So the site question, the high school has the creation of a sports field that's like $4 million. So that's a single big ticket item. So the question is, are these in the other category, the assessments based on square footage too? In some instances, yes. In other instances, like an elevator. I didn't see any elevators in your other category, but we put them in our assessment if you got a multi-story building. And so in that case, we put a budget together based on the number of stops. So if you've got a 2-story building and you have 2 stops, then we use 2 stops times a unit price for that elevator. You might have doors. You might be replacing doors. So it varies a little bit, but the primary multiplier is square footage. Some of these were actually project costs that Lauren created based on work he has done recently. So you can see this is above and beyond. It is a little bit more, a little less defined. And what I did is I just organized it based on, I went through line item by line item and organized it into these categories that I think are relevant. Site work, hazardous material, mechanical, electrical, building enclosure, structure, and then ADA accessibility. Structure was actually replacing retaining walls that had deteriorated, structural problems that needed to be replaced. So I told you about the assessment because that's exactly what ODE wants you to look at. The school district took the initiative to put all these other items that are above and beyond. And the best illustration is development of a sports field with irrigation and artificial. It was like $4.5 million. That one item made Silverton High School green bar huge. A correction, the building enclosure is not the exterior. This is building components. There were many times he said, well, we need to build a new kitchen, or we need to build some new restrooms, or we need to add a science classroom. That's what that orange category is. I was mistaken. It's a little different than the previous one. So we will share these details with you, but you can see there's a lot of detail. I boiled them down to a few categories. So the next step is to the next slide. So this is what we did. We simplified all that. We took those 2 charts gave you the blue is the ODE assessment. The orange is everything in the other category. And it's interesting, what drove this primarily was the ODE assessment, because remember the top four? Middle school was the highest, high school was second, and then Robert Frost and Mark Twain were third and fourth. So the other category is important, but that OD assessment carries through if you put them all together. So the goal of tonight is to give you some idea of how, if you were to say we're going to do all of it, you can see where it would be apportioned. Now that doesn't not practical, but we wanted you to have this data or these bars to understand where your greatest needs are. I mean, one way to look at it is you could just do one building and take care of the middle school and I'm not advocating anything. It's obvious in this chart, if you just took care of the middle school and didn't do anything else, that means you still all these other schools. But you could then say, well, we got to do something to the other schools. So how far could you take your money if you took care of a little bit of all of it? So this is just data. If you were to take care of the out-of-town schools, it would be a lower investment to make those schools better than try to fix all your in-town schools. So it's some way that you can look at kind of creating some parity, which it seems to be a value in this community to pass a bond and to address, going back to some of your guiding principle. One of your guiding principles, I wrote it down, was all students, all community. Oh, here it is. All students, all buildings. You can't do all the buildings. So I really wanted to give you these bar charts so that you could have this to digest. And if you have questions down the road, we can drill into those. But this is good data. I hope you think it's good data for developing a long-range facility plan.
And Richard, we had a couple questions related to it, and then I had a question just to clarify too. So was this, do you know if this was done before the seismic rehabilitation?
Yes, some of it. So yes, those were $1.5 million, $2 million grants. So yes. And is this to fix? This is to, all right, these are just to fix. In some instances, the price of fixing is just on the ODE assessment, the price of fixing is very close to replacing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's what the FCI is. If your percentage of replacement is 80% of building a brand new school, okay, that's something you should consider instead of fixing it up, because remember what Tom was saying is when you fix it up, it's still the same school.
And Richard,
go ahead.
For the middle school, this includes the current part that's condemned, bringing that back up to standards, correct?
No. The way they did the assessment, the way they did the assessment, it didn't exist.
Oh, good Lord.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes. It's in there, but yeah. It's so I think that the value is that even if you fixed it, it would still. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So to expand on that even more, when you're talking in the other system assessment about hazardous material, that doesn't include any asbestos in the old part either?
Go back a slide, Jonah.
Colin, I think the only thing that it included in the old building was any of the systems that were going through the old building, the electrical panels and all that kind of stuff, but it didn't actually include the old building, doing anything to the old building outside of what it was running through.
So this slide right here, when you're talking hazardous materials, that doesn't include the asbestos abatement and all that for the old structure.
Nothing of the old building.
Oh man.
But
I'm gonna ask about that because I believe I contacted BB&L and asked them And it did actually include the old building.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the report here, and it says the main building is 13.6 million.
Well,
And presumably the
okay, it is in there, but look at, this is the other systems. Look at all this hazardous material. That came from renovation of, you've got the east building, the west building, and the gym. And all those have hazardous materials in them as well. So that's where that abatement came from.
And
Right.
so
This abatement, this graph right here is only talking about those other three buildings, not the main.
No, it is including the original building as well.
Well,
to get it
the
to
PBL one, but this is Lawrence, so Lawrence might have not included that.
Right.
We're gonna look right now. Hold on. Or not.
yeah, if we look at just how it broke down, can you guys hear me okay on this?
Yes.
Okay. If you look how it broke down before escalation, it was about 32 million, almost 32 million total at the middle school. And the east building was about 5.3 million. The gym was 5.5. The main building was 13.6. And then they had modulars in there as well. Concessions was 620,000. The stadium north was 2.7 million. The stadium south was 30,000, and the west building was about 3.6 million. It's kind of, and again, that's before escalation.
Yeah. So to clarify, we didn't include any of the stadium or concession buildings in this analysis. It did include the main building, east building, west building, and gym. And just in the other category that you're looking at right here was 3.2 million before it was escalated. And that ended up 4.9 million. That was the gym, cleaning the utility tunnels at 150,000, wallboard, sheet vinyl, gypsum ceilings, roof abatement. In the west building, it was about the same. In the east building, about the same. And then in the main building was, let's see, the tunnels, roofing, single ply roofing, wallboard, vinyl tile, and gypsum wallboard ceiling. So this chart doesn't include any of the stadium improvements, Jonah, or the concession. But back to the main, I'm sorry, go ahead. So let's see, in the so the building is currently all right. So here's what it was included in the other. Building is currently vacated and is unable to be reoccupied until brought up to code. That was $264,000. And it doesn't really describe what that includes. So that was not in the, go back, just to clarify, this is a really great question. Go back to, one more. Oh, that's it. All right.
Oh, so, there we go.
Okay. So in this, there is no abatement. In this chart, they didn't have any abatement. You don't see hazardous material on the right-hand side. So when you go to the next slide, which is other, we combined for this chart, the main building, east, west, and gym. And that's where we get to almost $5 million in abatement right there.
Gotcha.
So we did not, we kept the, excuse me, we kept the stadium and some of the, and the portables out of there because it wasn't germane to the building itself. And ODE doesn't even count the modulars.
And Richard and
So-
John, I just want to be clear. Is that cost include what it would take to actually reopen Area 38, the old building, for kids to be in there?
And I don't believe it does.
I-
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I guess that's what I think Colin was getting after is, does that cost actually, is it an accurate assessment of what it would take to redo the old building to actually have kids go in there?
If you included the other category, it tears it down.
So just to tear it down.
Yeah.
And so then in the previous slide, to build it back, the cost of building back the old part is not in the previous slide.
Correct. Correct.
That was okay.
Yeah.
So we're talking 35 million to bring the wings, the east, the west, the gym, everything back up to code. Plus the next slide is another 8 million.
Hold on, I'm going to reopen because I combined all those buildings. Again, the assessment is individual buildings. So that I'm going to look back at that. So all that building category does do a bunch of, it's paint up, fix up. So the short answer is yes.
So we're talking 35 million to redo the wings, the gym, and then 8 million to tear down the brick, the area 35, as we so lovingly call it. 38, yes. Sorry, Brett, yeah. 38. And then that doesn't include the cost to rebuild the footprint of where area 38 would be. So you're talking, I mean, that's going over 50-some million dollars.
So just to replace the main building is 20 million bucks. And it's in the study, it shows the replacement of the main building only. It's the same cost to repair it or to replace it. Okay, so hold on, I'll give you the others. That's main, the east building. So we're at 20 from this assessment. The east building is another 10. Okay. And the west building is another 8, so we're at 38. And the gymnasium to rebuild, these are all rebuild, is another 11, so 50 million, yeah.
But when I just did that, so if you're saying it's 35-ish to re-up the wings and everything else, another 8 to tear down the old structure, and 20 to rebuild back the old structure, that's 63 million.
No, that was all inclusive. You don't need to add back in the demo. It's included in that number. So I was reading you just replacement cost, and it was essentially 20. It was 20 and 11 for the gym. Write these numbers down. And
hey, Richard, I'm not sure if it matters. I don't know if that cost is still relevant with the gym. It just got seismically upgraded. I don't know what that includes. If that.
And I think. Thank you, Brett. You're absolutely right. We have not. This is just budget. We're not looking at a solution. Tom last week talked about the option of maybe reusing portions of it, like using the gym and building. That's the part we need to craft. We're not. I don't want anybody to assume that we have a number. We will look at that when you come to a conclusion that, hey, this is what we want to do, then we're going to drill down on this. And like I said in the opening, the creator of this spreadsheet said this is not a sheet that you use for creating a bond title. It's for creating a long-range facility plan.
So just out of curiosity, on the other assessment one we're on right now, the orange on the middle school, the building enclosure, what is that above what BRBL had?
I've got it open. Hold on here.
Is that where because you said the stadium and things are not included.
Right. I've got a spreadsheet. This all comes from a spreadsheet. I'm going to open it up again. Hold on. And again, this was, hold on. Apologize. Where am I? All right.
So, when I talked with BB&L about this, I don't recall if abatement of hazardous materials was part of the cost, but abatement has to be done regardless of what happens to those buildings. And so the cost of salvaging the building for the whole structure included all the square footage, including the modulars, the old wings, everything. There's considerable square footage in the original structure. The gym has been seismically upgraded. And when I talked to him, it sounded like really that it was just a rough estimate, and the building would have to be explored kind of specifically to address really what it would cost to make it a functional building. No matter what we do with that area, I think we need to address the making it, if we decided to try to see if it will be salvageable, see what it would cost to make it a truly modern building that was highly functional and not just band-aid it together. And so got it, strip it down to the bare bones. And I don't think the BB&L really identified that at all.
Yeah.
The number they gave was really a crude estimate to make the building.
Yeah.
Have wiring, painting, heating, a new roof.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. Yeah. So let me finish up a little bit, Jonah, in that we're not talking about a design right now because we don't know which way you're going to go. And that is an exercise that we would do an entire session just on, okay, what are the options? Can you refurbish that centerpiece? What do you do with the gym? What do you do east and west? So yes, the BBL assessment came right off the spreadsheet, and it did not include any hazardous abatement because it wasn't on the spreadsheet. And down below the line, the other category did include $6 a square foot for something of that middle building. It looked like it was demo. You can't do anything for $6 a square foot on that main building other than take it down.
So I think that kind of goes to Tom's question from the chat of, does abatement cost go way down if you're talking demo versus you're talking saving? I would assume it does.
It is certainly, all right, yes, it's certainly cheaper just to remove it, but you have to go in and tear it all out before you start demoing it. And Gresham High School just did it. It was loaded with abatement, and they tore down about 150,000 square feet. So, and I don't want us to get too far ahead in the planning. You know, the numbers are big, but what else are you going to do? And how do you kind of, we could take a sidebar and come back with kind of some scenarios, but I don't think that really would address the bigger picture. And we are going to do that. So I'm sorry I got passionate about it because the numbers don't reflect they don't reflect a plan, they reflect an assessment.
Yeah, they kind of, I mean, I think a way of saying it is they give a comparative scale on the needs, but when you have an actual plan in place, that's going to change the total dynamic of it, you know, but it does give you, I mean, just like any other scale, just like the educational adequacy, that maybe the scale is not totally reflective of it. It gives you kind of snapshots and it's supplemental information as you gather more information. Because at the end of the day, you know, whether this is replaced or whether it's remodeled, those are going to be different costs. And I think this also has a little bit of the educational adequacy in it, because in some of those other categories, and correct me if I'm wrong, Richard, they actually address some of those items, you know, that were on those wish lists, i.e. covered play, you know, and an extra classroom here kind of thing.
But I will say using these assessments is going to be huge for when you get to a point to try to hope for a bond or get people to vote for a bond. Because if you start getting questions of, well, I want to keep the old brick building because it looks great. Well, if it costs $15 million more to keep the brick building because it looks good, you know, and like plumbing, a whole new building on a different part of the property for getting the new utilities to that, if that still is cheaper than having to redo the old one and all the new plumbing fittings in the old one. I mean, that's the kind of stuff we're going to need to know, you know, going into vote or trying to get a bond.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
We agree. It's the way it's set up. You really can't put together a scheme using it. You have to figure out, you have to do that comparison of replace or renew, and it is the same configuration. You can change the interior, but it's still that kind of cruciform, and you have an auditorium in the middle that is very large space. That's part of the square footage.
I think essentially, I believe at the last meeting we talked about getting a crude assessment of what it would cost to do the different options. I feel like at this point, we don't really have a very clear sense of that expense. And I think moving to kind of table a lot of the discussion, just identify that we really need to get that information would be a valuable thing.
And just to put some meat on that bone, Tom, again, we have to go through the exercise of conceptualizing and producing a plan before we can do something like that. So you have to know what the plan is. That was kind of where we were starting last time, trying to understand some of the site explorations at the middle school to get a sense for that. And we'll come back to that, you know, once we kind of get some more of this foundational information. But for us to give a relative sense of cost when there's no plan in place is really a futile exercise. It doesn't work unless we know, okay, how many classrooms are we doing? You know, how big is it square footage wise? Are we going to have extended learning opportunities? Are we going to look at the north side of the campus and put it over there? Are we going to remodel the building over here? You know, even in the remodeling of the building, we have to understand what's the deficit for the educational environment. So how much do you have to add on to it? So you really have to have a plan and understand if that's the right plan before we could actually put dollars to it.
Are you trying to say something, Colin? I'm sorry. You're on mute.
I was thinking out loud to my wife, but I was just thinking you also kind of need to have some of these costs known before you formulate that plan. I mean, you can't come in here and say, well, we need a building with this, and we're just going to build. I mean, one of the things I was going to say is I think this community right now, one of the things you hear about the old high school or the new high school when it was built was we built Taj Mahal. I personally don't agree with that, but that's some of the sentiment out there. So, you know, I was wondering along the lines of if you went in with if you found similar sizes of buildings that have already been built that work well, and you had a blueprint kind of already sort of there, that's going to go a long ways with our voters to say, this is what's already been built somewhere and works. It doesn't need to be a whole new architectural design that nobody's ever had. I mean, it could be an identical school to something in Forest Grove. If it works and meets our needs for the cost, that's going to get more people to vote for it than if they think we're trying to create some big new elaborate thing.
And we agree with you. And what we're proposing is that let's talk about the rest of it. Let's talk about what else is in the district. Or is this committee already to say, well, we're only going to do the middle school? What else are you going to do? And you know that you don't have, we talked earlier today about how important the community schools are. And if they, from my experience, if they see there's a new middle school in Silverton, then what's in it for them? So we can do that for you. We want to get there too. We just would like to come up with an entire plan of priorities, and then we can give you some really fine-tuned information on what that middle school component is. What are the other components that you might include in this? Is everybody at a point where saying, okay,
yeah,
you just need a middle school and that's it?
So I'm curious, what do you estimate the time frame to, if last time, as I recall, we had a conversation about coming up with a sort of a rough cost analysis for, say, building a new rural school that was K-8 that would house probably 3 of the schools, maybe either 2 or 4, and then an approximate cost analysis of a whole new middle school and approximate cost analysis of salvaging the original middle school to be functional like a new school. What sort of time frame do you anticipate being able to come with some of that information?
Well, we think that we could develop that in a subsequent meeting in the 1 month gap. Now, remember that we're gonna have to make a ton of assumptions. And the estimate, or this guesstimate, is gonna be limited to how many square feet. To really get to how it works and what does it address, you have to do a conceptual design, and I don't think you really wanna go that far. So I think what we're setting it up to do is once we get some idea of the entire picture, we can turn around that kind of first round assessment in a month in between meetings.
yeah.
But we don't, but I heard we discussed the magnet school or central school to serve 3 of those existing community schools. Based on what I heard, they don't want it. They don't want it. So I think it's the complete opposite. They would rather have their schools as they are now instead of a new school that doesn't serve any community. But if what this committee says you want to pursue, we can get all of that done in 1 month.
Yeah, the formal survey that I really understood was that they're kind of asked if it was a choice of closure, basically, when the community was asked, my impression was they were not really asked if they would what they'd feel about having a new facility that might serve their community. And that's a really important question because I've gotten the gist from a number of people just anecdotally that having additional options for learning would not be outside of their interest level. And what we talked about before is there's a certain amount of concern that the idea of being pushed to the city schools really is low on their list of fun, good ideas. And so they are definitely attached to their facilities. But I think actually giving you a chance to answer that question would be very helpful.
And I believe we're going to look at that survey in the next meeting so that we can really discuss that, which again, we're advocating this gives foundational information to making that decision to address your question, Tom.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, Colin, and you bring up a good, concern and question as it relates to, really kind of creating a plan that's too much. And at the end of the day, when you do a long range facility plan, it's always going to be more encompassing than what the community can support. So you have to prioritize. You come up with a plan, and that plan may be $200 million. I'm just grabbing a number. Well, then that's when we say, okay, out of that, if that is the right plan, then we know that we can't support $200 million in this next bond measure. Well, how much can you support? And then if it's 50, 60, then you take that $200 million plan and you prioritize. You kind of say, okay, well, what's really the highest on the priority? Every district, their needs exceed their bonding capacity. Every district that we've ever worked for. And it's just the reality. But in order for us to get real dollars and a real, idea for what the community could support, we have to first go down the road of creating a plan. So with the middle school, as an example, if we were to plan a new middle school, we would have to come up with a plan, get a dollar, get that estimated, get a sense for it, and then chunk it in a sense and move on to the next facilities and kind of, and not necessarily in that order, but it's hard to work from, okay, well, what can the community support? And then let's just create a plan that fits that dollar amount. It's more about what's the plan, and then what can the community support, and then what can we take out of that plan for the community. Does that make some sense?
Where I'm confused, or when I had somebody text me and ask me the same question is, are we saying that we need to come up with a long-term 10-year, whatever year plan for each campus before we even talk about going into where we're going to be on a bond? Does that put us at are we talking May of 2023 by the time we get all this figured out? I mean, that's what kind of where I'm at is I think we all can understand. I mean, the Silverton Middle School is an issue now. And I'd like to know, we already put it off 5 years ago when it got voted down again. So what are the abatement costs now versus what they were 5 years ago? We wait 3 to 5 more years to demo and do this. Those are the things, but are we saying that we have to have every step of that figured out all the way through before we go to the board to try to talk about getting a bond?
I don't believe so, but we need to have that first round, that 5-year plan.
So we need a 5-year plan for every campus.
No, you can, it could be, you need a 20-year plan. Have them put it this way. I've actually seen a district created a 20-year plan that says we're going to replace XYZ school in 20 years. That's the extent of the plan. No price, there's a rough cost, but it's not part of the plan. And they take all of it and they say, okay, phase 1 is going to be this. And then you fine tune what goes into phase 1 that becomes the bond proposal.
Because I guess, and this is just my own personal thought, but I really like the idea that was floated early on about a new bond that defers towards the back end while we're paying off the existing bond for the next 7 years. Then you look at what you can do when that one's done. Can you do something similar then? But I think to wait 7 more years for the existing one to go away is going to put us 7 more years into some really high costs in a way deeper hole.
Sure, sure.
I have some thoughts that I'd like to interject if I can. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So I think our job as a community or a committee is to get that information. We got to figure a way to go out to these communities in town, out of town, each individual school area, and ask if they would even be possible to ask our neighbors, would you pass a bond? And why or why would you not? We need more, because I agree, Colin, with you completely. We got to get this done sooner than later. One of our first meetings that we ever had was talking about the longer we wait, the more expensive it is, by sometimes millions of dollars. And we're not doing our job of saving money and spending these community tax dollars as wisely as possible if we can't get that figured out. So I don't know if that means we got to go to churches and have a town hall meeting and say, hey, where are you guys at? What do you want? Like, we know that we have some needs here. Can we leave these buildings alone in the rural community and let them be fine and not have any issues with OSHA, ODE with the way they are currently? Can we, those kind of questions, and get the middle school addressed? I've heard things like a lot of things about covered buildings. Like, a lot of people want some outside covered structures. Those are cheap. Say, hey, like, okay, middle school, covered structures for everybody that wants one. And then can we pass it with that? And just getting out there in the community and asking what people think. I know one lady right now that I was like, I didn't even ask. She's like, I'll pass a bond. I didn't even say how much.
No.
She was like, I'll do it. I feel like we got to get there.
Yeah,
So,
great point, Josh. Those are great points. And I think, like you know, we talked about earlier. It's like, man, we have. It's so critical. Again, you're not going to make everybody happy. It's so critical to listen, especially in the outlying communities, because again, history lessons in the past have told us they don't feel like they were listened to in the past, and it's so critical to get out there and talk to them and just ask. I think, you know, Tom and I have been chatting kind of offline back and forth over the last few weeks. You know, that, you know, just, you know, getting out there and listening, you know, sharing with them all this, some of this abridged part of the data for their school that's, you know, appropriate to their school body, and showing them the cost it would be to replace, cost it would be to retro, ask them what they want to see, right? Because we could build them the greatest, shiniest, awesomest school, or maybe consolidate down to one, which again, I think, you know, is an idea to talk about. But if they're not on board, and we're not going to ultimately get their vote, being honest, you know, let's be honest, this is the end result's a bond. This is all for naught. And so it is so uber critical to listen at this point. I know I keep hammering that one. I'm sorry, but it's so important.
So are we saying that based on those couple things then that we feel like the first thing to do is to survey the parents at the schools? The parents, I mean, I don't know how you necessarily can get to the entire community out there. I think one of the things, so you basically start with, through the PTCs or something, you ask each school, what would it take for you to pass a bond, or what would you want for your campus to pass a bond? And you get those things, you file that based on these rough numbers, and you say, okay, for each one to get everything they need, this is what the bond would be. The other thing, the second side of that, is the last couple bonds have failed largely because I think there's two factors, and one, Aaron kind of brought it up, is each school wants to know, what am I getting out of this? The second thing is you have a large facet of people in this area that don't have kids in the system. And one of the biggest things I heard in the last go around, when we wanted to continue with the previous bond, can stay at that static number, was, I'm retired on a fixed income. I can't afford it. I can't afford it. And so that's where I think the deferring the bond towards the back end to keep that front end payment down is going to be key. And so I think that's the first thing is do the survey and ask what each school wants, and then come up with that number. And what you said earlier was pie in the sky. Maybe you add it all up, it's $80 million. Is anybody going to vote for that if this is the cost? And that's what we need to know.
Oh, I think if you go back and look at the history of bonds in this district, you'll find when you start putting carrots out to everybody, it doesn't work. The bonds that have passed have been very specific, very targeted.
Yeah, and I remember you brought that up. So I'm gonna interject here real quick, team, and you know, we've got 10 minutes left. I want to do something a little different as we wrap this up. I'd really like to hear from every single person as we put a close on this. And so if that sounds good to everybody, I'm going to just start calling on names based on where they are in the chat. And what did you learn today? What would you like to see moving forward, or just kind of any other thoughts that you'd like to get out there? And before we pull to a close on this. So Angela, if you can kind of keep track on this, on what did we learn. As a reminder, we have the parking lot of ideas here as well. So we'll take a look at that after we hear from you. But I'm going to start with you, Ray. kind of.
Thank you. I think you've given us some information, comparable type of information for a variety of different costs. But I'm really kind of confused by the discussion in the last 30 minutes. I can't attempt to put my favorite idea out there without having some idea of what the costs are. And so your reluctance to put, I understand your reluctance to put a dollar figure on, but Colin had a good idea. You can build a 500 student middle school in Forest Grove for whatever, 20 million bucks. That kind of information I think is really helpful.
Great, thanks, Ray. Brett, what'd you have?
I think the main thing is I feel like we kind of jump around, like some order of our next goals, and let's make some decisions and feel like we're moving forward. Because I feel like we kind of float around a little bit and debate about important things, but to get it kind of dialed in a little bit where this is what we need to accomplish, this is what we need to decide, and it's almost too wide ranging at this point. And then the second thing is, from a person who taught at the old Schlater building and then taught at the new high school, even though the high school has issues, it's a really nice building. So I'm just going to throw that out there for those numbers that we looked at.
Great.
I second that.
Scott? You're next on my screen, Scott.
I'm going to say that this is my second meeting and I'm just taking it all in. So I'm going to leave it right there. I'm just in a learning mode.
Okay, great. Jackie.
Okay, so I got a couple things. One of them is, as you guys are talking about bonds, I just looked it up, and this last election, 2020, we had in Oregon, because I feel like we kind of attack within, and we need to look outside of our community and see what other communities are doing, and not necessarily compete with them, but definitely bring that into the discussion. And as I'm looking, it looks like 14 passed out of 17, which is a pretty good result. And of those, 2, I would love for somebody to do some research on it. Newburgh passed a $141 million bond, and they have 23,000 population. And Bethel School District in Eugene passed a $99 million bond, and they have 5,450 students. So I'd like to see their plan, and us look outside of what do you want for your school to pass? Obviously, Wally mentioned that didn't work last time. So we need to compare what's going on outside of our community with other communities. That's what I say. That's
a great observation, Jackie. And like you said, there was a lot of bonds that passed this last go around.
Which is, it's not an optimal environment to pass a bond right now. So
no, it's not.
It was a great thing for education to feel that worth and that importance. Like people, families, communities want schools to succeed, and that's a structure, that's a building as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Peter.
Yeah, hi. A couple of things, and one kind of minor thing I want to go back to, because the issue and what really sparked it was the lack of food service. And I know the comment was that the schools kind of chose that, but to me that starts to address the equity issue of can a student select a school if they have an economic disadvantage and the food insecurity. A family in that community gets unemployed. I'm sure that the school has some function, but it sounds like kind of an equity issue, and that's concerning, as well as some of the ADA access, looking at the budgets for that improvement. They're across the board, but then on a per and a capita per student. So that equity kind of concerns me, and I guess that's what leads me to the final and just second point. There's a lot of discussion about community. I get that. I did not grow up in Silverton. My wife did. My kids are 5th generation here. Most of her family taught in the district. I get the community aspect and how everything merged, but when these decisions come with infrastructure in schools, the middle school being one, and even the rural schools, the conditions that they're in and will be in 25 years, are we doing this for the community? Of course, but I didn't hear a lot of people saying we're the student, and the student being the core, and the community supporting that student. So the school serves the student, and the community supports the school. And that was the missing link that I didn't quite hear in a lot of discussion personally. So thanks.
Great. Thanks, Peter. Melissa.
Yes. So I kind of wanted to reiterate what some people have already said. I feel like in fact, I was able to text to Colin at the beginning of this meeting and said, gosh, I feel like we've backtracked. I feel like we've kind of been spinning our wheels. We like to rehash the same things. We even talked about the BBL report again, which we've already talked about, but I did appreciate the graphs that you made of the BBL report were very helpful. And that was something that we hadn't seen before. I feel like everything's kind of been up here and we don't ever get down to the actual details and the actual numbers and, you know, what needs to be done, what you would recommend needs to be done, and how much it's going to cost us. So I feel like everything's just kind of the same old, and we're not really getting anywhere. And then I was going to mention equity, and I'm glad that Peter brought it up. I think when we're looking at some of the smaller schools that need help, they need work done, maybe not on the grand scale as the middle school, but they need work. And what we're spending as a district on those kids in those schools per student, I don't think it's equitable. And I don't think it's long range that we can sustain that. In 25 years, can we still spend this much money on these K-8 schools that are old and run down? So what are we going to do? Are we going to just patch them up? And that's what they may want because they want to be left alone. But is that the best thing for the kids? That's kind of where I am.
Thanks, Melissa. Shelley. Aaron?
I'm sorry, I'm just a board member. I'm here to only observe. So thank you.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I think we've got a lot of information here this meeting over the last few meetings. There's just so much to take in. I think to what was shared earlier, I think Melissa shared too, I think we got to get drilling down to getting a bit more actionable and what we've got in developing a little more concrete plan of what are the next steps on, you know, okay, we all know the middle school needs to be replaced. That's the white elephant in the room, right? But then what do we develop with the community input from the different outlying schools, the what's in it for me? What are the points we need to get laser focused on in each one of those other communities that need to be addressed in this plan. So, and again, I think the other thing I'm taking away is I think we really need to drill down and be very laser focused in our approach going forward, getting down in the details and moving along with progress of a plan.
Thanks, Aaron. Colin.
I kind of feel like maybe I've already said too much. But I would reiterate the narrowing down the focus, and I'd like to do that like on some of the things we talked about of, you know, cost per student to do these renovations for each campus, you know, to when you're talking about the equity and some of those. I also wanted to mention the K-5 group, the K-5 group in town that's working on the K-5 boundary adjustments is using a new map. And I was going to mention this to Scott, where they're looking at the demographics of each of these boundaries and the incomes and the free and reduced lunches and all that. And I just think kind of mirroring these committees together would be really interesting for us in this facilities committee group to look at the possible boundary changes that are going to happen with the K5 and each of the other boundaries, kind of how all that stuff fits in. And if the district's already kind of paying the money and working with that other group, I think it'd be interesting for us to see some of those same things.
Great. Thanks, Colin. Eliza.
Oh, hi there.
Hi.
I feel like I've been chatting because I have a lot of white noise. Oh, there's it's a little quieter. There is an obvious need for the middle school to be rebuilt. So I'm going to say that I think it'd be nice if we could figure out how to pursue what costs might look like on that in terms of either rebuilding a school of a common size on a fresh plot of the property, or renovating that campus as it is. I also think that that we need to laser focus in on the outlying schools' needs and find those simple things like covered play areas. I know it's made a huge difference at my children's school. The PTCs are the ones who have been really active on those, and I wonder how we can incorporate PTCs in our process, especially with the outlying schools. I think that's part of their strength. I wonder if we could consider going as far as making 3 K-8 schools in the in-town schools instead of 2 K-5s in a middle school, just to think way outside the box. I know it's starting again, but it's also kind of going back to what we were just looking at as best practices. And I also think that we learned that the outlying schools like what they have. And I really do think, as I have said for a long time, along with many of my partners here, that communication within the district is key. And it has a lot to do with connecting with people who don't even have kids in school. But it also has to do with making sure that those outlying schools don't think we're trying to put kids in a new middle school building. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Eliza. Tom.
So listening to all these really cements it for me. As sort of simply put, trying to find a common thought that will appeal to the district as a whole is really important to get the bond through. And I think stewardship of the school district dollars for a long-term plan that will provide the greatest service for the investment is key. So combination of some needs that the rural districts have combined with what will make the city part of the district run most smoothly and provide build community support.
Great. Thanks, Tom. Lisa.
For me, I have just enjoyed seeing all this information. It's interesting, and hearing from all the community members or all the panelists here, just where everybody's coming from, their thoughts. But yeah, I feel like, what is our next goal? What is our focus? Where are we going with this?
Great. Aaron. Thanks, Lisa.
Well, this. Sorry, we've got two computers in the same room. Since this is only my second meeting of this committee also, I feel like too much of the numbers talk and I just start getting confused, and that's a lot. But I would say that my hope for how we can proceed is to really, I think, mimics what a lot of people have said, but to focus in on, okay, we got to keep moving. I feel like, you know, I've had 3 kids well, 2 kids, that are now in the high school, 1 that's going to middle school next year. And I feel like it's too late for those 3 already. We've been talking about needing a new middle school since my sons started in the district, and now 3 of my 4 are going to miss it. I'm fingers crossed that my youngest, who's in 1st grade, can go to a new middle school. But so I feel like we need to get a bond. We need a sense of urgency. We need this to happen, sooner rather than later. I think that's one thing. I would also really love to work on, and I think that this is probably more than just this committee, but trying to figure out how to get rid of the us versus them that is in the district right now with all the K-8s and the in-town schools. Being a teacher at one of the in-town schools, it's a little hard to hear how it just sometimes makes me feel like people think that the in-town schools don't love their buildings and aren't working hard and don't love our community just as much as everybody else. So I just want to make sure that we do know that Mark Twain and Robert Frost and the middle school, that, we've got some really amazing kids, and we've got really amazing, and we are working, middle school especially, we're working really, really hard in some not great, circumstances. So I would love to somehow figure out how to bring that a little bit more together than it is currently. And I second, because I'm also on the boundary committee, somehow I get the joy of doing both of these. But I would love there to be some kind of communication. It seems like some of these things that are being talked about at both. And it would, at some point, I think it might be helpful to bridge that together a little bit.
Great. Thanks, Aaron. Wally, you're next.
Yeah, I think there needs to be a little bit of clarity on what the end goal. We talked about a little bit of a schedule, but what's the end product look like? I've heard some comments throughout the meeting that would tend to tell me that we don't have a clear end goal in mind. Then also, I'd suggest when we talk about numbers and bonds, we ought to talk about the impact the individual taxpayer. Silver Falls School District is a little bit unique compared to a lot of other districts in that we don't have a strong bonding base as far as commercial property, so it falls very heavily on homeowners. So that's going to be a key aspect.
Yeah, and I know, I don't know if it was the first or second meeting, you guys had a Piper Sandler kind of analysis. Is that correct? And I mean, is it worth revisiting that? I don't want to, go back and revisit things if we don't want to do that. But, I want to make sure that everybody has.
I don't think we need to go that detail, but I think when we talk about $35 million, we can throw that number out. But what's that actually mean to a local taxpayer?
Gotcha. Okay. Sean.
Sure. Well, a couple things. First, I hope this comes as more of an encouragement to Erin, because I hear what she was saying. I know a lot of us who are teaching in the K-8s have a lot of respect for the teachers and principals and support staff at the in schools. We think they're amazing. And I just thought it was important for me to say that we think they are amazing. It comes really more of a sense of fear from our smaller communities. That's where it really comes more from. So now on that, I think it's important for people to understand that vision is more important than a carrot. And I think we get lost in that sometimes. Well, let's give them a carrot, see if they'll come along and vote for our bond. No, I mean, you got to go to those community, those parents, those students, and bring them in and say, what's your vision for this school? What would really get you excited about where you're going to be in the next 10, 15, 20 years? How can we come alongside you and help you reach what the vision is for your school? That is so much different than a carrot. Am I making sense how I'm saying that?
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. Great. Thanks, Sean. April?
She dropped off.
And last but not least, Josh.
You said about learning. I really liked the graphs tonight. I thought the additions to it were very helpful, and so I wanted to thank you guys for that. The top, just in my head, I was thinking like top down. So like, what is the number that we could pass? Goes to what Wally was saying. What is the number to the taxpayer that they could possibly absorb? Because property taxes in this city are very high. Some people are already paying $1,000 a month in property taxes. And just to even add to that seems very difficult. So my question is, what would it take to pass a bond? And what are the hurdles to passing the bond? And a lot of that would be just the communication stuff. Just getting out there and asking and what's going on and what people are thinking. And this goes to the in-town schools and the out-of-town schools. And I guess is ending like, I've been gone for like 15 years. I've only moved back the last 3. And I'd be like remiss to not bring it up. Like the split in the town, like I guess it is there. Like, I don't know why. I'm trying to figure it out, but the in-town schools are amazing. The teachers are working their butts off, and the out-of-town schools are doing the same thing. And I think if we can just bring everybody together and like the us and them thing that is there, because it keeps getting talked about. If maybe we're all Silvertonians, like we're all this school district, maybe we can figure this thing out. And just kind of figuring out, like just letting know that the outlying schools, I guess, aren't hurdles to passing a bond, but they're definitely a contributing partner in us going forward, and how we can they're all going to go to the same high school. Like we're all going to play on the same sports teams at some point. We're all going to do the same drama, the same music. We're going to beat the same drums. And so we're all going through the same system, and how can we meet each other's needs to benefit this community? And you're right. There was a great comment earlier about thinking about the kids, what's best for the kids. But the other issue is that the kids don't get a vote. It's the parents. So how we can kind of bring this community together, I guess, is a thought that I've been having. So.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks for that, Josh. Appreciate that. So speaking of next steps here,
So Jonah, oops, let's see. Yeah, Jonah.
Yeah.
The question needs to be, does everybody want to revisit? We thought it would be good to revisit that survey that was done in 2019. There's some shaking heads no. We thought it would bring context to the community temperature.
I think if you could condense it into those little slides like you did with the BBL report and kind of update, that would be fantastic. But I don't think we need to go back and redo all the history that we've already done 8 times.
Okay. So Jonah, I do think, and this might be aligned with some of the conversation we've heard, we wanted to talk about how you structure a budget. And I think we could do it in a context of some comparative schools. So that's on the agenda. Does that sound counterproductive? I think it really goes hand in hand with any kind of plan that you make, because for every dollar you put into a bond, you have to spend at least another 38 to 40 cents. So it is the development cost. And so we want to alert you to how to put that together. So when you're hearing about somebody built a school for XYZ, that you then know that, okay, yeah, but what was their development cost to the school district? And that is a bigger number. So I think it's valuable. It's detailed information that you need to put together a plan. But that's what we planned on.
Yeah.
I have a request. Can we get what the bonds looked like that have passed in the last year or two versus the bonds that both passed and failed, so we can see what might be elemental in them that made a difference?
Yeah, and we did look at that I think it was the fourth meeting, Wally pulled together, and I'll rehash that and send it out to everybody, that presentation.
I was actually thinking about statewide other school districts.
Oh,
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
What are other school, what did
Gotcha.
Canby just do? Yeah. Yeah, Portland
Gotcha.
Public Schools doesn't count, but certainly Canby and Newburgh and Bethel. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, and we'll definitely do that and pull some of that together. What I can tell you is they are very targeted, and they do have a very clear vision on what they want for their district.
Right.
And every successful bond measure that we've been a part of has done the same.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I'm just going to ask a really dumb question of the group. Does the group just want us to start putting together plans and concepts for the individual schools? I mean, is that kind of what I'm hearing a little bit?
I personally, I think getting a rough idea, I was going to say a rough idea of what a new school for the middle school, cost of salvaging to make the old building functional like a new building, and the possibility of the cost of a rural schools for say 350 students or 500 students, which would encompass growth for the rural areas. So 3 schools, not all the schools.
Okay, and I think so. Let's talk about that a little bit. We did talk about the parking lot idea, and getting consensus on that. Do we want to? Is that something we do want to look at, team? For those 3 schools, and kind of consolidating those.
I think it's a guaranteed way to make a bond fail if you try to float that.
I would say that's not a given, Wally. I would also like to comment on Tom's question about bonds in other districts. If you get those numbers, make sure you include the millage, because as it was pointed out, Silverton does not have a monstrous assessed valuation.
Yep.
Gotcha. Okay.
So I'd like to go kind of to what Wally has been saying is that trying to give, basically what we've been saying is trying to figure out what we can give all the schools some. He said earlier when I said that the holding the carrot out there won't get it done. So I guess my question to Wally would be then is, what is going to get it done? Because the last time we got it done was when we were absolutely forced for one new high school where all of these different schools brought their kids to go to high school. So what we're trying to do now is build a new middle school that obviously is for the town area because that's where the need is. And so within that, also trying to give to all the outlying schools as well. You're saying that won't work, but if we go for if the cost, no matter what, I mean, so the last time it was not keeping the cost the same for both phases of the high school was too much. Are you saying that if it's going to cost us $50 million for a new middle school to keep the taxes, if we do the deferment a little bit above what they are now, they'll get voted for, even if none of the outlying schools are going to get any of that $50 million?
My belief is that would have a shot.
But if we can do it for equal to what the amount was when the both phases were on there before, and within that we get a new middle school and the outlying schools get some, you don't think that would pass?
I think it's a tricky road because, again, many of the people in the outlying communities want to be just left alone. They want to keep their small schools the way they are. If we did throw stuff in there, very targeted, like if a school needs a new roof, that'd be part of it. I think that'd be seen favorably. But when you start spreading a bunch of stuff out there, you just start losing support quickly. People find problems with this and that, and it starts going downhill quickly.
Wally,
Say, if I can add on to that,
Wally?
and it's maybe just kind of rehashing the same things, and I apologize if that's the case. But see, what happens each time is when I think everybody knows the middle school is a disaster. I don't think there's anybody on this group that disagrees with that. I'm talking about the building. I better clarify. Talking about the footprint there. But what gets concerning to the outlying people is they see, well, if they're going to put a bunch of money into the middle school, are they going to take all of the 6th or 8th grade kids from the K-8s and put them into town? Now, I've had former board members, not Wally, who have said, isn't that a great idea? And of course, my immediate thing is, are you nuts? No, that is not. So it, somehow, and it comes back to the trust issue. It really does. And I myself don't know how to completely fix the trust issues. I'm just being honest with that. I'm not sure how. But that's where we get stuck when we talk about middle school and what to do with the K-8s. Sure, if you guys were to offer Silvercrest a covered play area, all for it, absolutely. But others are going to have more trust issues and have more hesitation.
That's a good way to put it, Sean.
Yeah, and I've seen it a few times in the chat. Just the idea of allocating a percentage to the middle school and then a percentage to everything else, kind of thing. And I mean that's an interesting way to look at it. But I do want to honor everybody's time. We've gone over really great discussion again, as always, and just talk about next steps. Next long range facility planning meeting, January 20th. I think that's, and we'll solidify that, but I think that's kind of the same time frame that we're working with here. I'll work with Scott, Steve, and Lauren on that one. We already talked about that. Great. Well, thank you, everybody. I'm sorry?
The next meeting is at 6 p.m. again?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and we'll clarify that.
Thanks, Jonah.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, committee. You guys are great. Really working hard. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.